what's up? Hello, hi, how are we doing? What's good? Hello. All right, the broadcast is starting. Hello, welcome. It's Analyzing Umbra. Hello. Crazy Smith, Delphi, Fat Yoshi, Confused Strawberry. Hello, Daniel. What's up? Sorry I'm a little late today. I needed every moment I could get because I was running behind on watching it and the presentation. But it is all ready. And if you are unaware, hello, my name is Mega. I talk about Critical Role and D&D, and now Daggerheart as well, TTRPGs in general. And I am very excited to talk about Age of Umbra Episode 4 today. So stick around. If you didn't finish the episode, I'll tell you exactly what you need to know for Episode 5 that you can tune into tomorrow. And we'll also be talking about things I liked, things I didn't like, good, bad, ugly, beautiful, all that. And I think it should be a pretty good time. So let me make sure that this is up. That is up. Toggle poll mode. Hello. All right. I need to make more of like a shortcut for that, I think. Let's see. If I refresh this. Hey, all right. We got some top words. In here. Let's go. Okay. Oh, I just realized. Okay, wait. Give me one moment. Remember when I said I just barely had enough time to finish the presentation. I forgot that I was going to make a slight edit to one slide. So give me one moment. Scale is put an exclamation point before your vote. Example, exclamation point one. Exclamation point one. There we go. All right. And we select all that, and we turn it down one. Also, some of the slides just don't have pictures because, again, I just ran out of time. Okay. Let's see. We didn't lose anyone in order to get Liam and Laura. True. They are not replacement characters. Or they're not replacement actors, I suppose. No, PCs, I guess. Let's see. Okay. We're ready. Now, let me swap over to that screen. Hey, okay. All right. So, this Age of Umbra Episode 4, The Rampart and Beyond, a.k.a. Summer of SCREEV. It's a SCREEV boy summer, I would say. And I am very interested. There's several things that I wanted to talk about with this episode in particular. We got a new lore drop that did provoke some little theorizing. It also had a lot of, I would say, Daggerheart takeaways for me. Less takeaways for Matt and the story and the GMing, and more just I noticed some more stuff about Daggerheart. So I'm very excited to talk about that. I feel like the way Daggerheart crits is great for making. Oh, that is on top of the top words, or it's not on top of the top words. One moment, I would actually prefer for that to be on top of the top words. There we go. I feel like the way Daggerheart crits is great for making celebration moments, but doesn't gel well with a grid mark thing, as Matt notices mid-game. Haha, yeah, we will slightly get into that, yeah. Doing any better? I am doing better. I mean, I'm going to be in and out of doing better for a little bit, but I'm doing pretty well. Let's see. Okay, so first thing is poll time. Poll time. And this is the thing I needed to edit. So, Adelia and SCREEV. Also, I will say, I know Adelia's name is probably not spelled like that, but I every time I looked at every time I looked at it with one E, I could only hear Adelia in my head. So Adelia is the thing. So scale is -5 to 5, and I will say, to get it put on the poll, put an exclamation point in front of your vote. So, for example, Chat Noir, if you want to say 4, put exclamation point 4. And we shouldn't need me to do like an actual like YouTube poll. Okay, 23 is on there. Note to self, need a way to be able to manually remove things. Okay, all right. So this is about Adelia and SCREEV, initial impression / opinion of them as characters. I'll talk about the timing of their introduction and like the story beat of their introduction more later. But this is specifically just like, do you fuck with them? Because like we talked about like Aaron. Like I wasn't really that into Aaron myself. But I was more so and then the timing of her was separate. So I'm also separating these. Seems generally high. We've got 4s, 5s, 3s, 2s. I think nothing in the negatives. Everyone was generally somewhat positive on them. It's just varying degrees of positive, and most seem pretty positive. Which is pretty good. Most people are hanging out around a 4. I did see that John put in, separate for SCREEV versus Adelia. That's fair. So yeah, sick. Very cool. I agree. I really like Adelia and SCREEV. SCREEV, I thought was super gross at first. I was like, meh. And he still is gross, but he's like a little freak. But him and Adelia, like, I don't know. The first impression that I had of them, I was like, ugh, I don't know that I like this. But then the more that it played out, I got more on board with it. So I think they're also like a 5 for me as a unit. I will say I'm probably more like a 3 on SCREEV and like a 4 on Adelia. Purely because I think how exactly do I say it? I think SCREEV is very funny, and like there's a reason that I put, it's SCREEV Summer as the title. I think he is much more sort of memeable in that way, which is not bad in the slightest, but I think that Adelia interests me a little bit more as like a backstory, a lot of the more like the details of her interest me more. I'm not sure I'd be on board with them quite as much if this was going to be a long campaign, but in a short one, let's go. I'm similar. I think SCREEV would get very grating over a long campaign, but I'm very down with him for this short one. Yeah. I like SCREEV less only because he's a little much for me, but I think that might just be Gremlin Liam was throwing me off. Fair enough. Yeah. I generally like them both quite a bit. But I think Laura takes it, or Adelia takes it a little bit more for me. Well, cool. I will turn off the poll then. We'll lock that in. Seems like high 4s, 5s, that sort of thing. Disable that. And then I'm going to take that off screen for the next one because it does not fit onto the next slides. And I will go over what to know for episode 5 first. So these are like big hitter overall shit. You know what I'm saying? And I'd say the biggest thing about this episode, it's in the thumbnail. It's, I think, impossible to avoid if you've heard anything about the episode so far. Laura and Liam. Even the poll that I just gave is about Adelia and SCREEV. Laura and Liam's characters, young Adelia and creepy ass SCREEV. But the other kind of big things that I think happened this episode, they zoomed through Volcaru. They got there, they interacted. There was definitely like some lore interactions. We got a little bit of knowledge about kind of how Volcaru differs, I suppose, from Desperlock. But we got really small interactions there. I mean, to the degree that they didn't even actually go into the city. They didn't even go into the safety of the pyre, you know? Yeah, as Delphi is saying right now, yeah, they didn't even really go through Volcaru. So that was, if you were, how do I say it? If you were expecting anything substantial to happen with Volcaru, you were mistaken. But that's, I'm not gonna call that bad or good or ugly or beautiful. It's just what happened. They zoomed through it. And they are now currently in the Screaming Forest asterisk. They were trying, and I'll bring up the map here. They were kind of going around it near the haunted bay, but then are kind of on the edge of it. So right here is Volcaru. So this, it's kind of hard to see if I'm that zoomed in. This sacred pyre right here, this is Volcaru. The area up here is the Screaming Forest. So either the thing to the right or the thing to the left is the Haunted Bay. Either this is the Haunted Bay, or that is the Haunted Bay. I'm not entirely sure which. So they're kind of skirting the outside of the Screaming Forest near the Haunted Bay. And they are on their way towards Amber Reach. Also, no, Yoshi. I'm giving a presentation. I forgot I added little circles. Damn it, I forgot to animate it. Your cursor doesn't show, so we can't see what you're pointing at. Damn it. Okay, wait, let me see. Is there... Okay, there's no way that I can really do that. Let me just try painting. Let's see. It did show out when you zoomed, and then it was gone. Okay. So let me get a little bit of a smaller brush. Okay, this that shows. This is Volcaru. This. Okay, wait. I'll change the color. So wait. Okay. Blue is Volcaru. Green is the Screaming Forest, and then yellow is the Haunted Bay. I'm not entirely clear on which. And the party themselves went from Volcaru and either is like kind of going this way around the Screaming Forest towards Amber Reach, or they're going this way around the Screaming Forest towards Amber Reach. Is my understanding of the sort of situation we're in right now. So, that, I would say those are the big things that you need to know for episode 5. And next, to go a little bit more into detail, although I might just end up getting rid of the general synopsis, because I kind of cover it with the things you need to know, right? But the general synopsis, the first bit was them traversing the rampart on the way to Volcaru. They meet Adelia and SCREEV. They interact in Volcaru. And then they go into the forest, and they are fighting some fungrel / hive keepers. They are. Oh damn it! I also added circles to this. I'm not used to it. They are currently in the forest trying to make their way through. Kind of fighting off the threats. Now, last time I talked about the things I didn't like first, and I liked that format. I like ending on a more positive note. I'd rather get the negativity out of the way first. So, two things I didn't like, actually. A lot more that I did like this episode. But a few things that I still didn't like. Number one is the Fungril environment. I like that you kept the map pick the same. You want to know what's awesome? I didn't. Wait, one moment, because you know what's awesome is that I didn't, and the other one is hidden behind. Look at this motherfucker, dude. Look at his little cheesy, like, oh no, what am I gonna do? Uh-oh. That's fucking awesome that you thought the picture was the same. It is not. It is a totally unique picture from this episode. So, anyways, he's just, and he makes this fucking, whenever he's doing something that I'm like, you little Matthew, you. The expression is the same because Matt, exactly. Okay, the fungal environment. I'll focus. So, I'm being a little provocative by putting this in things I didn't like. I could have, maybe put this in something that I'm neutral on, but I think I hedged more into not liking it than liking it. I will say, overall, all of the physical maps, like the actual like set piece maps that are made with, I think it's a Dwarven Forge. I think Matt has gotten really good at thinking about verticality a lot. The bridge map really played with the verticality really well. The fungal map even had some verticality on it. But separate from that, I really, really liked the bridge map. I thought the bridge map was cool. I didn't really put it on any of the slides because it was also a little weird to me. Like the map that we saw in 3D didn't quite gel with like my imagination of how it had been described, but that's kind of neither here nor there. I didn't have that complicated of things to say about it. The fungal environment, on the other hand, I'll put it kind of like this. Funky Backup was very funny. Funky Backup was ostensibly the environmental action that Matt was using to summon more Fungril to the fight. That was funny. And even the countdown, which I liked that the countdown existed. I thought that added a nice aspect and a nice kind of facet to the fight. But the countdown was to summon more dudes. Funky Backup was to summon more dudes. And I'm just kind of getting tired of summoning more dudes. Like, it was the thing that the Gate Guardian did besides jumping. He summoned more dudes. And we really just haven't had even the Limb Wreath. The Limb Wreath had a reaction to, summon more dudes. I think the most complicated, like, external actions that we've gotten in combat outside of summoning more dudes is Velk's Throw, which I loved, and the River's Undertow action. And And so there's nothing really wrong with summoning more dudes. It's just like a big, like, been there, done that sort of energy to me. And I'd really like to see something especially less entity focused. I'd really like to see something that changed the map in some way, or made a certain part of the map fundamentally different than it was before. An aura, maybe. I'd take an aura that, like, follows an entity around. That'd be fine. Whether it's a curse aura, like a debuff or a buff aura, I could have that. That'd be cool with me. A landmine, maybe. The Fungrel shoots out these, like, little spore pods, and they're gonna blow up after one action or something. I don't know. It's just... You know what I mean? It's not that bad. It is just that I didn't like it in context. It feels like Matt is not introducing many new ideas at this point. When I saw the bridge map, it hit me how much things have changed in 10 years as opposed to his grid paper maps. Well, they certainly have. That is very, very, very true. I'm sure we will see something interesting when they actually encounter Umbra. Oh, maybe. The Umbra is a very interesting question mark to me. I am incredibly excited to see how Matt handles the Umbra, especially given that my assumption going into this, and especially, after session 0, session 1, 2, that sort of area, I was definitely interpreting the pyres as these sort of like checkpoints or, these safe zones. However, the interaction in Volcaru really put that to bed. The sacred pyres are safe zones, but not in like a game sense, not in like a video game, like, oh, you're going back to port or you're hitting the waypoint or the checkpoint. It is like, yeah, these are safe zones, but you gotta earn your way in. You're not just gonna get in for free. And that really makes the Umbra not only a very substantial threat, like in general, but it also drives an amount of curiosity in me as to like how Matt would even handle that, because the Umbra has felt to me almost like a natural disaster, like a hurricane. Even beyond that, like it feels to me with the way that I've like kind of interpreted and intuited the Umbra so far, it feels like no one could survive the Umbra. It feels like if they get gone over, if the Umbra goes over them while they're not in a sacred pyre, it feels like they just die. Like that is the way that I have felt with how it has been described up until now. So it's interesting. It's interesting. And I think that Matt is definitely reinforcing my sort of feeling of that with like talking about the Umbra coming back to Desperlock. It's like this it has like these almost like weather pattern type shifts where it is like doing an entire rotation of the Halcyon domain in like 6 to 12 months. So it's almost like just this like roving sort of storm. But it's hard for me to picture exactly how people even could interact with it, right? It is still a bit of question mark in my head of like, okay, I get it in general. But like practically, like what happens when the Umbra is over your settlement? Like you just can't leave? That seems... I don't know. I don't want to say unlikely, but it seems very tough for how big I've pictured the Umbra, So I'm very interested to see the Umbra up close, because I think I have a good general grasp of it, but the details are still a little bit elusive to me, you know? I feel like Matt mentioned in the last countdown an environment effect that didn't get activated. Maybe. I would have rather have seen that than the countdown or the funky town. Like, you know what I'm, yeah. Like, I totally get it. I can only judge based on what I've seen, and the thing that I saw was just like, all right, same bag of tricks, you know? Haven't we already brushed against it with Velk and Aaron, or is the Umbra literally only the Umbra wind? I think that the general answer is unknown up to interpretation. My interpretation of Velk and Aaron is that they were like influenced by the Umbra, or they were changed by like an essence of the Umbra. And that like type of essence, that like type of like corruption, I think can be referred to as like the Umbra or Umbra influence. And then sort of separately, there is like almost like a weather event that is like, I think you've kind of described as like the Umbra wind. And it seems like the Umbra wind is the most common way to like encounter the Umbra's essence, is in this big weather pattern that travels around the country, or travels around the Halcyon domain. But then there are maybe like little fragments or little bits of Umbra essence kind of scattered around, like in the thing that Aaron opened. So my general answer seems a little ambiguous to me, but in a way that I do not mind by any means. It's more like a shut down safe zone. The pyres are very interesting. I thought the timer was separate from the funky backup summoned little shroom guys. The timer was for the group getting discovered by the hive keepers. Oh no, it absolutely was. That's why I'm not talking about this in terms of like the adversary design or the fungrel design. But I do think that the environment that they were in had both the funky backup and the hivekeeper backup. Or at least my interpretation was that the funky backup was not necessarily an ability of the big mushroom. I interpreted it as part of the environment. I could be wrong about that. But either way, in that encounter, environment stat block and adversary stat blocks included, mushed together, all we got was summoning more dudes. I just want to see something that's not summoning more dudes. I like that there was a countdown. Like, let me be very clear. I like that there was a countdown. I liked that the adversaries did have a fun ability. And like, I would find that ability fun and interesting if I just hadn't seen so much of it already. I do love how one guy could have gotten them into the town that Sam's character knew, but was murdered. Yeah, that is true. Maybe someone will have to sacrifice themselves, or even better, be sacrificed by the party. I could see Travis kicking SCREEV down, and yes, Travis and not his character. Yeah. Maybe. We will certainly see. I want the Umbra Wind to go basically full Silent Hill Otherworld. I mean, that seems like what happens essentially if one of them dies, right? Because if they die, they immediately like go over to the Umbra. That's part of why I theorized that Velk was already dead by the time they found him, and that was just maybe what it looks like for someone to go over to the Umbra. Is this kind of maddened, insane state. Or it could have just been that Velk was already a little off before. Totally unknown. But I think if one of them dies, we're gonna see that sort of thing. Like, they either have to burn the body or they will rise again. So I think we'll get that regardless of if we actually encounter the Umbra Wind itself. According to the book, those that spend time in the Umbra aren't dead per se. They're mutated into horrors. And see, and that's And that does make sense to me, and this is sort of what I mean when I say that I feel like I have a good grasp of the general state and the thing of the Umbra and the Umbra wins. But I can't quite place the exacts. Like, is it like first night you spend in the Umbra? Or is it 2 nights, 3 nights? Is it a gradual process? Is it like your defenses have to get beat down and then it kind of all happens at once? I'm not entirely sure. Because the Umbra Wind feels like it would change someone more quickly than the essence that was inside of the sarcophagus. But maybe not. Maybe the essence inside of the sarcophagus was like the preternatural, or the sort of pre-apostasy essence that is like part of what created the Umbra Wind. And now the Umbra Wind is maybe a little bit diluted. Maybe it's too spread out to have that, really quick changing effect. So that's what I mean. I think I understand the broad stakes, but the details aren't totally clear to me. Anyways. Then the 7 players. So that was the Fun Grill environment. I didn't have much issue with it beyond really, hey, give me something new. And then the 7 players. Now, I started off Critical Eyes. I started off my other series about Critical Role Campaign 1, Vox Machina. And one of my first primary complaints was, holy fucking shit, there are so many players. And I was wondering if that would be the case in Daggerheart. Mainly because one of my big problems with having that many players in D&D is that it slows things down so much. Especially if you want to have combats that are balanced for that many players. You need more adversaries, or you need the adversaries to be more beefy, and either way, the sheer number of players still makes the combat take longer because everyone has to have their turn. And so I was wondering, I was like, okay, is Daggerheart going to have that issue? Because it is the no initiative system, and I've personally played it with varying levels of players. Like, combat takes a pretty standard amount of time, right? Because it is just like the sides each taking turns instead of individual players. And it definitely was better than D&D in that case. Like, I want to be super clear. I did not have the same problem with 7 players that I had in D&D with all their players. D&D, it was, hey, this is taking way too long. In this, it exacerbated a problem that I've already had with Daggerheart combats, which is that I find them harder to track, especially as an audience member. Now, I can't speak as a player. I haven't played. I've only GM'd. But I can imagine that it's probably harder for them to track as well. But I'll just speak for myself as an audience member. Even when there was 5 players, I found myself getting a little bit lost. Like, okay, where is that person? Where is this adversary? Okay, these people are moving, but that person didn't. It's a little bit more difficult for me to track. I think it'd be easier if I was actually playing, but harder as an audience member, and I think still probably harder than, say something like D&D. And I found that difficulty in tracking what was going on got worse when we added the 2 players. And not only did it become harder for me to track what was going on, but I found myself forgetting about characters that were involved in the scene. Because I think one of the big strengths of Daggerheart is like, the person that can be effective or the person that has an idea can go at any time. It allows for, I think, some more tactical decision-making and more interesting combats, frankly. But it also, I found, with this many players, made it a lot harder to track what was going on because some players were just going more than others. And I've talked before about, I've seen some worry and concern from either my own players or just people that I've talked to in chat worrying that this would be harder for new players to sort of get used to. And I can tell you, I'm playing D&D 5e with my wife right now, and it's her first campaign, and she has said she does not like combat in video games. She seeks out video games that are very, very combat light, but she really likes combat in D&D. And she has directly said that it is because it gives her a pre-prescribed moment to roleplay, where she doesn't feel like she has to actively take the spotlight. The spotlight is just passed and given to her, and she's like, oh, this is the time where, it's my time kind of in the spotlight. And I think that general mindset could have some problems with the no initiative system of not only do I have to take the mindset, or do I have to take the spotlight for roleplay in general, but I also have to do it for combat. It could be that just presents that extra layer of friction for new players. And to me, I kind of noticed it with the 5 players, but I noticed it more. I don't want to say way more, but I noticed it more with the 7 players of, just certain players not doing much. And I was thinking oh man, if any of these people were new, I can really imagine a new player just not participating as much, specifically when there's this many. Now, if you have much less, say, 3, 4, that sort of range, I think this problem shrinks a lot. So whereas in D&D, the problem with adding more players is that it makes everything take longer. In this, it felt more like the problem with adding more players was that it becomes way easier for players to kind of slip into the background if they're not comfortable putting themselves out there. So that was the thing that I didn't like this episode. And I wrote down, I'm very, very willing to come around on this. I might, continue to watch, and my opinion on this might change, but this is how it felt in this first sort of episode, seeing this many players. Daggerheart combat is faster than D&D. Oh, absolutely. Hopefully it will get even faster as the players get to know the game better. Totally. And I think that I was happy to see that adding those players, at least in my eyes, did not seem to elongate the combat. I think that combat would have taken a similar amount of time with 5 players. Maybe a little bit shorter, given that they're, the 2 new players haven't played as much with these characters, so I think there was a little bit of extra lag time there, but I don't think it was appreciable, and I think it'll disappear after a couple of episodes. So I did really I think this was a good sort of, not proof of concept, I guess, but proof positive that the scaling number of players does not affect the timing of combats, or at least doesn't affect it substantially. We did see the players sometimes get confused. For example, Taliesin thinking that he's got some ability to stop whatever Matt was doing. Yeah. And this will come into another thing that I'm uncertain on and that I'm neutral on, which is sort of rules-like confusion in general, as a general concept. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. Yeah. I wonder if it would be good for beginning Daggerheart players to form the combat like a D&D one. Possibly. I think there is certainly an argument to be made that if you have a player that is maybe a little bit more shy about taking the spotlight, that I don't know. I don't quite know how to say it. It feels like it should maybe be a uniquely Daggerheart session 0 conversation of, hey, how comfortable are all of you taking the spotlight? Because this is a no initiative system. How comfortable are you with taking that spotlight? And if, everyone is uncomfortable with it, maybe there needs to be like a mechanical adjustment or accommodation for that. If, half of the people are, half of the people aren't, maybe you could get away with just saying, okay, hey, you two that are, like, try to, not rope in, but like, you guys try to encourage the others as well. If there's like only one person and like three that is uncomfortable and three people that are very comfortable, it might just need to be like a table mindset thing. But I do see that being a uniquely Daggerheart problem. Or maybe not uniquely Daggerheart, but uniquely no initiative problem. There was a similar problem in Blades in the Dark, which also is an initiativeless system. So it's certainly not something that breaks a system for me. It's not a make or break. I have loved playing in systems that had this same sort of thing. But I was definitely very conscious of it while watching. It really stood out to me. Travis put something on the table to help him track who was taking turns in combat, but I couldn't see what it was. Yeah. I did like how Matt was also keeping track of who hadn't had a turn in a while. Yeah, and that might just be the thing that has to happen. In betas, they used to have like these action tokens that you would pass back and forth. And I think it's a good thing that they got rid of those. But some general manner of tracking who, I don't think you need to necessarily track who's been taking a lot of turns, but maybe just who hasn't had a turn or hasn't had an action in a little bit. I do think that's a good thing to keep in mind as a general table. Like, I don't think it should be all on the GM. I think it's a good thing to keep in mind as a table, especially, again, if someone is maybe not as confident about taking the spotlight. Ginny D's video for today was relevant. She played a TTRPG with only 3 rules. This was meant to help players see what rules are really needed for them to play. Ooh, interesting. Yeah, that would be relevant. I don't even think it has to be the GM, but one person should be keeping track. Yeah, I can see there being a somewhat unique role in the same way that, like, there's a common archetype of players as like the note taker or this or that. I can see a unique sort of role in really high player count games, because I don't think it's as necessary in lower player count games. You just are more naturally aware. But when there's 7 people to keep track of, maybe in the same way that you have a note taker, you should have like, a turn tracker person that, has like a little notebook or something to keep track of who's taking turns. And I really hesitate to tie it to mechanics, like homebrew mechanics. I really hesitate to do that because I think the initiative-less system is a huge strength. And anything that would constrain or hamper that, I'm very hesitant about. But someone just like taking notes and being like, oh, hey, August, you haven't taken a turn in a while. Do you have anything you might want to do? I think that could be very valuable. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. And you will already see I have way more things that I liked than things that I didn't. I liked a lot during this episode. A lot. And Amarok brought up tag teams right here, which is on the list of things that I really liked this episode. So, first of all of the foreshadowing danger. Oh my goodness. This is something that I sometimes get on, Vox Machina era, what was that, 8-10 years ago, Matt, for not doing as much, not foreshadowing danger, kind of just jumping it on the players. Sometimes a surprise attack is nice, but broadly, I think that foreshadowing danger should be kind of the default. I've thought that ever since I learned how to play BitD, Blades in the Dark, and it was one of the core pieces of advice in that. And I've been really abiding by it ever since. I love it. And so much of this session was filled with this sense of foreboding danger or encroaching danger, or just danger just barely lurking out of sight, whether it's because of the darkness, the density of the trees. It felt like there was danger around every corner. And it is because, like, I think that feeling was instilled because of Matt's really consistent foreshadowing of that danger with his audio descriptions. So even the I think they were called like pain beasts. I wrote it down. The wolves, basically, like the Umbra wolves. I believe it was pain beasts. I wrote it down, and I want to get it right. Well, maybe I don't care. They are pain beasts. Okay. The pain beasts could have been shifting in the shadows. Oh, you see a flicker over there of movement, but was it real or was it not? A lot of it could have been visually based. The problem with making it visually based is that does imply an amount of precision to like your knowledge of what's going on. We're a lot better at precisely identifying things with vision in our eyes than we are with our ears, and the audio. We're still good at it with audio, don't get me wrong, but not nearly as good as our eyes. And so the audio not only adds an amount of sort of I don't want to use that word. I was going to say noise, but it's bad metaphor for this particular discussion. It adds an amount of ambiguity to like where things are and what things are. And it allows you to communicate things that are out of line of sight. That allows you to communicate something that is much further away. And that means that you can communicate something that the players actually have time to react to, right? If they hear it before they see it, they have a chance to react to it before it hears them, which is very important. Or, not before it hears them, before it sees them. Because if they have, similar eyesight to us, they're probably going to be able to see them. So I really, really liked all of that consistent foreshadowing. I liked choosing audio for that foreshadowing, like for that sensory description a lot. I think it was really, really good. Also, I mean, I think it kind of goes without saying, but it really enhanced the feeling of like a nighttime stealth and exploration. Is the fact that they were just listening and there was very little visual description. I think it really enhanced the feeling of that nighttime atmosphere and environment. And even in the Screaming Forest, everything being kind of audio-based. The Hivekeeper buzzes were really cool. I was very, very into that. Next, the team-ups and the setups. As Amrock described, the tag team roles allowing players to include others who have not acted on their own, which is yet another collaborative piece of Daggerheart. I agree. I loved the team-ups and the setups in this session. And I didn't even think about what you just mentioned before when I was making this presentation, but you're absolutely right. The team-ups and the setups really do allow maybe a player that is more comfortable with taking the spotlight to set up or team up with a player that's maybe less comfortable with it. And that player that is, maybe more comfortable with it could be the person that is being set up, and they could be like, oh, hey, can you set me up? Or they could say, hey, I think I have this good idea for how to set you up. So even in what I was talking about, I think that there may need to be some consideration for players that are less comfortable taking the spotlight. Simultaneously, I think there are so many more tools in Daggerheart to allow for that consideration and to allow for players to I keep thinking of the term rope each other in, which sounds kind of negative, but to include each other. So yeah, I loved it. I loved seeing it. And I don't have much to say about them other than that I like how they are implemented. I think that team-ups and setups are a thing that most games kind of have this feel that they want to do, right? Like every game, or at least maybe not every game, but I think a lot of modern games at the very least want to be able to recreate naturally Iron Man, bouncing the beam off of Captain America's shield, right? They want to be able to replicate that moment in a way where you are not doing nothing but that, but also in a way that doing that is better than acting separately in some scenarios. It's a tight line to walk, but I think that Daggerheart does it really well and just has really good tools with which to accomplish it, namely hope. Like the fact that hope is this naturally regenerating resource, right? You don't have to go to a long rest to theoretically, or I shouldn't say that. Going to a rest, going to downtime is not the only way to regenerate hope. Hope also just does naturally sort of regenerate. And so that factor and tying the team ups and the setups to hope spend creates a natural sort of barrier, a natural impediment that means you can't be doing it constantly. And you might not always want to do it constantly. But it also really allows them to power it up, right? It allows them to very easily say, well, okay, because you're spending hope, we can easily make this more effective than either of you acting separately. Because, again, it requires that hope spend. So I think that Daggerheart was really set up well for it. And I think it's more of a compliment to the hope and fear system, frankly, than necessarily the implementation of team up and setups. But that's not to take anything away from it. I really like it. Chrono Trigger dual text? Absolutely. Yeah. Imagine some really good creature noises this episode. Great creature noises. So good. Yeah. Next, HP thresholds. Now, I've been generally positive, like broadly positive, on the implementation of evasion, armor, damage, HP thresholds. Stress, I guess you could say. Like all of those are kind of the combined mechanics that make up your defensive capabilities and the negative things that can happen to you. And this episode, there was a very specific moment, and I think I have it in my presenter's notes. I don't have it in my presenter's notes. But it's somewhere. And this is the sort of thing that I would normally hyperlink, but there it is. Okay. I found it. 38:35. I'm going to pull up the moment because I think it's a good moment to show off. 38:35. It's like right around here. So this is in the middle of the bridge combat, where they're fighting the pain beasts, and after they have, or at least while they're in the middle of rescuing Adelia and SCREEV.
Edge. I'm going to spin a hope. Yes, I can. I just have to spin a hope, and I haven't fucking had.
Okay, this is on too fast of a speed. So this is where I was about to say Keyleth. Brixton spends a hope and adds a d6 to gore it with her tusks.
Head bet forward with it. Yes, I can. I just have to spend a hope, and I haven't fucking had any.
All right. For an additional
2 damage.
2 damage. All right. That does mark another hit.
So it's actually kind of funny. Like, Travis is a little bit, how do I say it? I don't think he's being mean or rude here, to be clear. But if you're so used to playing D&D, an additional... Oh, see, our audio is a little low. I can fix that. If you're so used to playing D&D, 2 damage seems like literally nothing. But I really... It's one of the reasons that I really, really enjoy the HP thresholds. because that little bit extra, and especially like let's say that she hadn't done any hit points before, right? It had like somehow evaded it, or this is like an extra attack. Sarcastic cheerleader. That's a good way to put it. But I think that that's the mindset that D&D kind of puts you in, of like, 2 damage doesn't mean anything. Like, I wrote down a bit of a rant in my notes that I won't go all the way through. But the sort of mindset of representing health with dozens, if not hundreds, of discrete units of health means that really low values of that really just feel like nothing, right? But I really, really like that in Daggerheart, a hit is a hit, right? There is like a baseline level of damage that or not of damage, I shouldn't say, because that's kind of a keyword. But there's a baseline level of effect that hitting someone has. Getting past their armor, getting past their evasion. If you make contact, you do something to them. In D&D, 2 damage to a barbarian is a fucking rounding error, dude. Like, yeah, you didn't, you got through their defenses, you managed to connect, but that 2 damage almost literally means nothing. And so I really, really like, and I like seeing it in practice, that if you hit, any amount of damage can matter, right? That 2 damage is not basically guaranteed to be worthless. 2 damage is a scrap. Yeah, it's like you got him. It's great. Like, because the thing that a scrape in D&D. Yeah, precisely. Because it really ties down into. Oh, right. But I didn't even finish the clip.
But it's something.
Great.
It's something.
I'm gonna spend a fear.
And Matt said it does make me mark an additional hit point. That was the main thing I wanted to show. But it really reminded me of the how would I say it? It reminded me of something that happens in Blades in the Dark a lot, where Blades in the Dark, you roll before you roll. It's not really like D&D, where like say you're rolling to hit someone to damage them, right? Like you're in combat. The amount of effect that a success would have is predetermined. So it's basically like if the GM told you ahead of time, if you hit, you will do this much damage. So there is variance to effect, but it is pre-decided. So you decide the variance of effect, the GM and the players decide together, before you know if the actual action was successful or not. So there's not this sort of like runtime randomness that there is in, say, like something like D&D, where D&D has randomness and variance regarding whether you hit or not, right? You have to overcome the AC. So it's like this binary, like you either pass it or you don't. But then after that, there is not only variance in whether or not you hit, but if you hit, there is variance in how effective your hit is. And I think that variance is something that people like. Like, I want to be very clear about this. This is not me saying that variance is bad. But because the values can get so high, but the values that you roll can stay pretty low, there slowly becomes this like weird, almost like decoupling of what an individual hit kind of means. And I really think that the HP thresholds system is a really good way to address that decoupling, where you can still have this variance, right? You still roll damage, but the overall effect still stays within kind of this range that is easy to narrate, right? The actual effect that your hit has is 1 HP, 2 HP, 3 HP, or I don't know what the critical over severe is. I don't know how much HP that does. Is it just one more? Is it 4? Right? But it's 3 or 4 values, and that's it. For the entire game at every level. There are 3 HP thresholds, maybe 4. I don't quite remember how critting works. And I like that a lot. It makes HP to me feel way more reasonable. It makes it feel more evocative. Like, it is strange to me. Like, I think this is a strange part of D&D. That 1 HP of damage feels incredibly different at varying levels. Because I don't think that is how most of us experience, like, health and exhaustion and, like, these negative health repercussions, damage in real life, right? I think it is more reasonable to say that broadly, we experience it as kind of like a percentile gradient, right? Like, the experience of someone who is very, has really good cardiovascular health, is what we would think of as like a very high constitution, is very hardy. The experience of that person slowly getting to the point where they can no longer fight or continue on, right? Which is kind of what HP is supposed to be modeling. It's this mixture of physical health and stamina. That sort of experience, I would argue, is kind of percentile in real life. Like, a very weak and shrimpy person that's maybe very out of shape is going to, like, if they experience, 1 unit, arbitrary unit of exhaustion, like, let's say they run a mile, right? The amount that mile exhausts them is going to feel much more exhausting. It's going to essentially go through more of their HP than it would the more hardy person that's like a marathon runner, right? So these same types of, like, damage or stress or exhaustion are going to affect people differently, but they're going to be, like, experienced as, like, a descending gradient very similarly. I hope that makes sense. Like, I hope I'm not losing people. It's this very weird concept that I didn't really think about until this episode. But the more I did think about it, the more I loved that translational step of damage into the HP thresholds. Because I think that intermediary, like that step up and down, is an incredible way to model hardiness, to model, like, what a high constitution looks like. You can do things that might be exhausting to someone else. You can experience things that might be damaging to someone else, and you can come out with relatively less exhaustion, relatively less damage. So it was a thing that I already liked, but this just showed me, damn, that is why I like it. And every time it happened, it just reinforced to me that I think that this evokes a fantasy that is more interesting, that is easier to describe, and is more true to life. Which those three things are rare to get in concert. A lot of times when you're looking at these kind of alternate systems, they kind of, if you're looking at like an alternate system compared to D&D, they might be improved in one of those factors, but maybe they're less improved, or maybe they're decreased in one of the others. Whereas I think Daggerheart is kind of better across the board. Like, I'll put it out there, man. I think that the way that HP and damage are handled is just flat out better. I think there's a lot of things that are, have pros and cons in Daggerheart. I think there's a lot of things that have strengths and weaknesses. The way that HP and AC compare between the two systems, I like Daggerheart's just strictly more. 4 is a variant rule. For what? I don't know what we're talking about. Oh, the whole the severe damage. Gotcha. That makes sense. And we're about a minute away from running ads. So I'll read through maybe some comments while we're waiting on those. We've got about a minute. I need to add an option to like run them immediately, or run them in a minute. For HP, gotcha. But yeah, so I was really a huge fan of that. Next, the Hive Collectors. I don't have much to say, so I'll say about it. I'll talk about this in the minute before the ad. They're just fun. I don't know. I haven't been that into the mutants that Matt has presented so far, but the Hive Collectors I really dug. I don't know why quite, but it felt like they were more of just not like a random mutant with a random mutation. It felt like they were these mutants with these mutations that would kind of present them with like a unique niche or like a unique kind of place in the world. Compared to, What's up? Hello, we're back. All right. Yeah, I said about all I had to say on the Hive Keepers, or on the Hive Collectors. They're just cool. I liked them. I liked them more than the a lot of the custom monsters that we've seen so far. And number 5 of things that I liked, using fear to run. This was, to me, a good example of, like, you know, sometimes you run because of, like, how do I phrase it? Like, monster personality, right? You think about their priorities, and oftentimes staying alive is one of those things. Is one of those priorities. So running in that sense, but there's also separate reasons to have things run, not just, you know, playing to the monster or the adversary kind of sensibilities. There's also, like, sometimes when they defeat the biggest bad, I guess, in the scene, like the big mushroom in this one, it is very reasonable that the minions or the lower tier enemies would be like, oh no, they killed the big guy, we should get out of here. Especially if they have more reinforcements, we might say, elsewhere. That's, like, one of the key parts that I think keeps it from feeling somewhat contrived, we might say, in something like D&D. But there's also kind of an outside of the game GMing tactics reason to have things run in D&D, which is that if the players have clearly won, it is oftentimes not worth the real life time to act out the final hits of the combat, right? You kind of just want to skip the end once it's clear that they have won. And I liked using fear to run specifically because not only did it, you know, kind of guarantee that they got away and guarantee that they could go and notify their reinforcements or their backup or what have you, but I think it protects the action from feeling contrived even more. Like, the fact that the GM had to use resources, use future turns, future power, like, Matt could have easily just let those two things die, and then he still would have had fear for later. But instead he uses the fear to run, so now them running and the combat ending, quote-unquote, early, doesn't feel like he's trying to, like, do them or not do them a solid, but it doesn't feel like he's trying to, like, contrive against them, if anything, the opposite. And, again, the fact that it still fit within their internal mindset made it all the better. But I thought it was very interesting as a subtle way to waste fear without it feeling like you're wasting fear. And I'll talk about wasting fear a little bit later. I'll do some foreshadowing for it. But I did peg it as, like, a good way for the DM to waste fear if they need to, without it feeling too crazy. I think everyone uses fear to run away. Well, that's true. That's true. Okay. And then after things I like, we now have things I'm unsure / neutral on. I added in the neutral this time because number 2, I'm not quite unsure on it. I'm just very neutral on it. But the main thing I am uncertain on is the Adelia and SCREEV introduction. And I think I had some notes on it. I didn't, or at least I didn't put them in there. Essentially, the thing that I'm uncertain on with their introduction is kind of the, how exactly do I say it? I'm almost certain I wrote it down somewhere because I can remember going through these thoughts. And I want to make sure that I don't miss anything or like misrepresent because I liked the way that I wrote it down. Let's see. Reminds me, Matt made a comment. Oh, yes. Okay. So I found the notes. They are sus. I think one is the BBG. It's weird so far that we have no idea why they came on board until now. Okay. So that you are very hitting on like why I'm uncertain. So oh no, I reformatted the screen and so I lost it. There we go. So Matt made a comment at some point in the early combat. It was at some point after the 40-minute mark where he said something to the effect of, I was holding back a bit while we were still getting through the rules. Essentially saying like, oh, it was when he spent a fear to take the spotlight. And that was a little bit weird to me at first because I was like, I'm almost positive he's used a fear to take the spotlight before. But regardless, it's like, okay. So there was an amount of like, not priority, but there was an amount of intention of they were trying to slowly introduce aspects of Daggerheart across the episodes. Okay. To me, that kind of speaks to the idea that given how long it took for Liam and Laura to come in, and the fact that it seems to have been somewhat planned, like it seems like they had like, a backstory reason for being where they were that is not really interrelated to the primary plot in any way that I can tell, at least. My only thought is that they may have wanted to introduce Daggerheart, Age of Umbra as a frame, like all of the gamey stuff, with a more reasonable player count. Like with it, you can do that? Yes, Spencer, that moment. It seems like they may have wanted to introduce a lot of the gamey stuff with like, less than 7 players. And then once the core 5, and more importantly, the audience, is more used to Daggerheart, then you bring in the additional players. And possibly the players just all talked amongst themselves about who the 2 that might come in later might be. That's a theory that to me makes the most sense to explain how they were introduced and why this was, why they waited so long, especially given what we heard in this episode. I think if it were me, I still might have done it a little bit more gradually, like introduce Laura and then Liam, or Liam and then Laura. But I could also easily see it being that Laura and Liam said, okay, we're the 2 that will sit out, and we want to play characters that are connected to each other, and we want them to be connected in kind of this way. And the most reasonable way to introduce characters that were like that just kind of happened to come in episode 4. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. But I that is the kind of, because I said it last stream. Like the last time we talked about Age of Umbra, I was like, I have actually no idea why they have waited why we have waited so long to bring them in. I have actually no idea. And this is the best explanation I can come up with. I'm not married to this explanation or interpretation. I'm very happy to be proven wrong or argued against, or the answer to be different. but that is currently what seems the most likely to me. I'm not necessarily saying that it seems likely, just the most likely. That makes sense, but it seems unlikely to me. I think that's fair. I think that's a fair thing to say, which is why it still goes in things it's part of the reason, at least, that it still goes in things I'm unsure on. See, but they are too sus for it to not be story related. The fact that they look similar but have not blood relation is weird. Do they look similar? I didn't actually catch that. That they looked similar. Yeah, I didn't catch that. But man, I don't know. I do not know. Like, I didn't hear anything, like, their backstory in terms of its, like, strict plot relevance seems about as relevant as August and Misty's. Like, it might come up, no question. I think there's a really good chance that, like, it comes up more. But I feel still that Misty is probably more what we would call plot relevant than either of them. And so I really struggle to see why they, like, I don't see any plot relevant, like, reason that they needed to be held off for so long. So yeah, I don't know. It's very tough to say. And overall, I mean, the only reason I could see them maybe still being, like, very plot relevant but needing to hang off until now is if, like, maybe Volkaru is very plot relevant. But I kind of would have assumed that if Volkaru was more plot relevant, they would have spent a little bit more time there. And, like, Matt would have, frankly, made it easier for them to spend more time there. So I don't know. White hair, pale skin. So this is, I saw yours and I wanted to pull this up. Does she have white hair? Does Adelia? Am I getting that wrong? Adelia. Does Adelia have white hair? I know. Oh, she does. Okay. I mean, that's fair. I mean, they certainly could have been affected by a similar thing, but I do see where you're going with this of, like, you know, even that, like, to me, that just speaks of potentially, like, a shared backstory event. You know, they said they've been traveling together for, like, 6 months, or something around there. You know, it's certainly possible. It's certainly possible that there's more going on with them than I'm giving credit, but I don't know. I don't see it. Oh, you're blocking her portrait? Well, damn. She did have white hair. That's really the only important thing. She did have white hair. Yeah. Their character is the brightest of the PC. I don't know. I just get a weird vibe from them. Well, that's fair. I think that's incredibly reasonable to get a weird vibe from them. Don't get me wrong. But, like, I don't know. I don't get a weirder vibe from them than I do from, like, August. But I think you getting a weirder vibe is very reasonable. So I don't know. We'll have to see. I'm keeping my eye on them, but I don't know right now. And then something I'm neutral on, but I did want to bring up because I do think that it was relatively relevant this episode is gridded versus non-gridded combat and ranges, which I need a better word for, but that is essentially the concept that each range in Daggerheart is actually, like, it is not an exact measurement, right? Long range can be many different, essentially, measurements. Like, long range can be 90 feet. It can also be 100 feet. It can also be 110 feet, right? It's like a range classification. but I'm going to call them ranges. And how that interacts with gridded versus non-gridded combat. There was a comment in the Discord, or a message and a conversation in the Discord about Daggerheart's ranges and how that interacts with the like non-gridded combat side of things. And I won't go too deep into that conversation in the Discord, but I did want to bring up, because I think we saw it here during this session, is that both of these are essentially ways to abstract, or I should say gridded combat and ranges are both ways to abstract distance measurements in a TTRPG. So let me kind of show you what I mean. So in the kind of comparison that we might make, we'll go like, oh, nope, that's not a thing. There we go. We'll go gridded versus non-gridded, right? We'll kind of compare the two. And we'll say that this square is kind of like the, it's the battle arena. It's the space in which you can, move your minis, right? On a grid, this is chopped up, right? And this might be, clear to some of you, but I'm still going to go through the whole process, right? On a grid versus a non-grid, these parts of the battle arena are chopped up, so you cannot move in such a way that it does not transfer you from one square of the grid to another, right? You cannot move from this part of your square to that part of your square, right? There is a restriction, there's a constraint there in a way that there's not in the non-gridded, right? If you are in this square of the grid, and we'll put like an equivalent spot here, and say there's an enemy over here that, has a range that can kind of hit you, you have to move pretty far. You have to move like to here, to here, to here to avoid that hit. Whereas in a non-gridded situation, you might be able to move a much smaller distance. You might be able to move maybe just to there. And depending on how the system is designed, this very small movement might leave you in range of one of your abilities, but it might get you out of the attack range of your adversary. Whereas that sort of precision and that sort of nuance and granularity is not nearly as possible in a grid. For that same sort of tactic to work out, where you move out of their range, but they're still within your range, the range of your ability would have to be substantially larger on the grid, right? In the gridded system. You wouldn't be able to have, like, say this represents, these are each 5-foot squares. So they have like a 10-foot range ability. Well, in order to move away and still have them be within range, you would need a 15-foot range ability. Whereas in the non-grid, you might be able to get away with like an 11-foot range ability, right? So you have more of that nuance and more optionality. You have more tactical options as a player, as a GM, as a system designer in non-gridded. Okay, that all sounds pretty great. What's the catch? The catch is that it's tedious. Any additional layer of nuance or granularity within our measuring techniques, within our distance measuring techniques, means that you are introducing tedium. You are making it harder to just intuit things. If we have a grid, it is much, much easier to just look at the grid and know about how far away everything is. Know about what's in range. Like, okay, 3 squares, that's within range. On not a grid, you might not be able to tell the difference between 12 feet and 13 feet on a grid, right? You might not be able to tell if you are able to pull off that really nuanced tactic without going down and measuring. As Chat Noir put it, rulers. That is the con, is rulers to non-gridded. And we actually see the exact same sort of thing, I would claim, in ranges versus ranges of ranges. Rang. Right? So this is maybe the D&D. And this over here, oh no, there we go. This is the Daggerheart, right? The range of ranges. These have the same sort of effect, but reversed, which means that I actually probably should have put them on opposite sides. And I am going to do that, but I'm just going to call this RR, and we're going to call this one R, and you're going to know what it means. You're going to remember, I swear. For ranges of ranges, this is an abstraction of measuring distances in the exact same way that a grid is, right? With a grid, instead of saying, okay, I'll change the color so that we don't get distracted. On a grid, we say anything in this square is 5 feet away from anything in this square, regardless of how far away they actually are. Right? It doesn't matter if in the fiction you're actually right here. For the purposes of the mechanics, you're 5 feet away. Right? That is like the level of abstraction that we're talking about with a grid, and ranges are similar. In the play area, if I am here and you are here, if we measure that out, we might say, okay, this distance between us is exactly 20 feet. But within, the ranges usage, this is, I actually don't know what 20 feet is. I think it's close range. We would say that we are close. But if I'm here, and this is, say, 15 feet, I believe. You know what? I'll make the ranges much higher to where I'm more confident. We'll say 200 and 250. Or that wouldn't be 250, I guess. We'll say 2... Oh, no. Where did the thing go? Okay, we'll say 200 and 150. I believe both of these are far range, or very far. Fuck. We'll say they're both very far. I don't remember. Clearly. We'll say this is very far. And 150 is also very far. Right. So in a similar way to the grid of 1 feet apart is 5 feet. 2 feet apart is also 5 feet. 3 feet apart, still 5 feet. In a very similar way, 200 feet, very far. 150 feet, still very far. Whereas, if you are just using ranges, which is what D&D does, D&D measures things in feet. They just actually measure it in 5-foot increments of feet, which is a sneaky trick that they play. But actually, no, they don't. Actually, I shouldn't say that, because that's only the case when it's a grid, theoretically. So they still measure it in feet. So they measure this in feet. They do not abstract it at all. The difference between being 200 feet away versus 150, this is a very distinct difference. You are exactly 200 feet away. You are exactly 150 feet away. Now, the ways in which you can move, if you're playing on a grid, those are restricted. But the way that we actually measure range is not constrained at all. So, and without explaining it in too much more detail, the exact same thing, I think, in my opinion, applies to what I was talking about with the grid versus the non-grid in terms of tedium and in terms of intuitiveness. The grid and the ranges are both going to be more instantly recognizable, more intuitive. They are going to be easier to kind of clock just from looking at the board than either of these. Now, Daggerheart, or I should say, sorry, D&D chooses this pairing, whereas, so they choose kind of like one way of abstracting it to make it a little bit more intuitive, but one way of not abstracting it and making it less intuitive in that way. And Daggerheart does the opposite. By default, Daggerheart's non-gridded, but they have these ranges to kind of make up for it, right? We're not in a war game necessarily, like Warhammer 40k, where you have non-gridded with exact measuring, right? That's kind of this side of things. And I think the important takeaway to me and for me is that this side of things, the right side, this is going to give you more granularity, more tactics, more options. Both of these options, measuring in smaller increments, so right, the D&D measuring in feet rather than these kind of, close, very far, whatever. Measuring in that way is going to give you more design space. It's going to give you more nuance and more ability to implement interesting tactical decisions and opportunities. Same thing with non-gridded combat. And it came up, I think, today on the bridge map, where the bridge map had a couple of areas that I was like, that wouldn't really fit neatly into a grid. But because they're on a non-gridded sort of space, as long as their mini can fit there, as long as you have essentially like mutually exclusive hitboxes, your mini can fit wherever you want. You can get these really nuanced tactical movements and decision making, but it introduces a bit of tedium. You heard Marisha be like, am I in range of that guy? And Matt say no. And then Marisha be like, are you sure I'm not in range of that guy? And then Matt has to break out the ruler and measure it. That is the level of tedium that you are introducing on either side of these in exchange for the increased tactical nature. Whereas the grid or the ranges are reducing your tactical opportunities and the tactical design space of the game in exchange for it being much more intuitive, for it being less tedious, for there needing to be less rulers, In my mind, I visualize concentric circles for ranges. That's exactly how I use them in Roll20. In Roll20, you can have auras, and I put invisible auras that the players couldn't see around all of the adversaries that just kind of followed them around, and so I could immediately see when someone was within the range of ranges. Because I think that's a very fair way to sort of visualize them. Talking about grids, do you prefer square or hex grids? In principle, I prefer hex grids. In practice, I prefer square grids. Because square grids broadly have more support. If you go online to look at a map, it's probably going to be gridded in squares rather than in hexes. Certainly, there are some that are gridded in hexes. A lot of map makers will have the option to make it into hexes. But if you're looking for, I think, a solution that will offer you a wider range of options in terms of third-party content, keeping everything in squares is going to do you better for that sort of thing. And so without having to need to put in extra effort, essentially. Same, but Photoshop is our hex friend. Absolutely. I think if you're willing to go that extra mile, I think hexes are better. Just straight up. But for me, the juice isn't quite worth the squeeze. Even though I think hexes are better, I'd rather kind of the ease of access of squares. If everyone in the entire world got on board with hexes, I think that'd be a net positive. But squares are pretty ingrained currently. All right. Notable lore bits. Saint Potato Head. I don't remember the actual name of the saint. Where are my Saint Potato Head notes? I once I started calling them that, I couldn't stop. It's the saint that's buried in the tomb that they're going to. Evelyar. We learned more about Evelyar. So if you didn't watch, or you are interested, when they went to just Saint Taterhead, dude. When they went to Volcaru, they found out a little bit more lore about the saint that is interred in the Barrow of Blind Repose. And we even got a little bit of I won't even say a little bit. We got a pretty big hint about why it is called the Barrow of Blind Repose. And why I call her Saint Potato Head. Because she was essentially branded as a heretic post-apostasy. She, in case, people don't remember or didn't hear it or didn't pay attention, Evelyar rose as a holy warrior without sight, but instead supposed vision of the path the gods took when they left. Sorry, sometimes the transcripts are slightly off. It was said that her smile gave a golden glow, and her face, in quotes, her face is the threshold to salvation. A following began to gather around her in the wake of the gods' absence, and her promise of following the gods to their heavenly realms beyond this domain. The following began to grow to where the grand ordinance that remained behind didn't like them drawing the flock from their faith, and thus she was branded a heretic by the remaining ordinance and executed. Importantly, her eyes and face removed, and her body sealed within the tomb you speak of. The branch was laid with her in hopes of keeping her corrupt spirit bound away. Now, number one, I don't remember who was arguing this last stream, but they were absolutely right about the branches having distinct purpose and distinct sort of abilities and being placed in specific places because of said abilities. They are not just kind of incidentally left over from pre-apostasy places. So I doubt it. I did not think that was what was going on. That was not what I had gotten from a lot of the description, but they were totally right. The sacred branch was placed with Saint Potato Head, eyes, head removed. And it was done that for, or they did that for a very specific purpose. And I am the thing that gave to me, and this is a horrific setting. Don't get me wrong, but to me that was described so casually, of they removed her eyes, they removed her head. Either the casualness speaks to the level of intensity in the session, the level of cruel callousness that they can have to these very macabre actions, or Saint Potato Head was a clank. We don't know exactly how much of a clank vessel needs to remain, and especially if possibly as a clank vessel she had these enchanted parts. Clearly her eyes were affected in some way. Her eyes were, it seems, at least if we take her claims at face value, could not see the real world, but could see this path to heaven. And her head, or, more specifically in the description, her face, was referred to as the threshold to salvation. And for those to be the two things that were taken from her before her body was interred clearly indicates that the ordinance, at the very least, thought those two things to be powerful in their own right, so powerful that they need to be separated. Now, again, that doesn't all speak to it being clank necessarily, but I find it more intuitive to me that a clank would have these specific body parts that have these like extra special abilities. I have no like hard logical reason for thinking that. That is just what is more intuitive to me, especially with the given connection to the gods, which I have the clanks themselves had this existing connection to the gods. So either way, no matter how you slice it, no matter what you think, that was an incredibly notable lore bit. And what was even more notable, or maybe not more notable, but equally as notable, is the description of the ordinance. It actually raised several questions for me, and I'll read the description to you. Matt said, "The Grand Ordinance were the most holy of priests and cardinals and faith-based leaders of Amber Reach, and cardinals and faith-based leaders of Amber Reach." I don't know why the transcript repeated it, and I didn't catch it. Who were part of the God King Othodias' council and court. To have a young woman step from obscurity in the midst of this chaos, and in the midst of this chaos, offer a path of divinity and draw their flock from them, that was not allowed. And what really stuck out to me about this is I was implying this whole time, I think pretty reasonably so, that God King Othodias was the one that committed the apostasy. And let me pull up the report from Session 0, and I will sort of read it to you. A century has passed since God King Othodias betrayed the pantheon, provoking divine punishment and abandonment by these gods, who then left the realm. So there's this complication that the ordinance, the authority, is still trusted and seemingly somewhat respected after Othodias' fall. I mean, ostensibly, these were people that supported, probably relatively until the end. I mean, they were a part of his council and court. These were people that supported seemingly the ultimate heretic. Like the one that committed the grand apostasy. I would find it fairly difficult as a layperson to continue supporting the people that supported him. Now, I won't say that it's impossible, and I think even to an extent, the fact that Mrs. Potato Head was gathering supporters does speak to the fact that people may have somewhat distrusted the ordinance in the days after the apostasy. But I found it a little surprising that they had any flock to steal from. And not surprising in a way that takes me out of it, to be clear. Surprising in a way that makes me think and consider about what the sort of context of the apostasy might have been. I had generally been operating as though the apostasy had been kind of a goal of God King Othodias, and that people had broadly supported his mission until it all went disastrously wrong. But this implies to me that is probably incorrect. That it seems as though God King Othodias was a somewhat solo actor. And, maybe even might not have even been fully in control of himself when he committed the apostasy. There is certainly a separation here between, the Holy Ordinance and Othodius himself. He's through this lore, to me at least, is a much more separated figure now than I had originally interpreted him. In fact, I had somewhat interpreted him as maybe a little bit of a patsy. I thought maybe he had been led astray. And there is talk of like heretical voices pre-apostasy that were trying to kind of corrupt people. But I had somewhat interpreted that maybe the entire establishment had been corrupted, including Othodius. But it seems as though, at least to a lay person, the religious organization, the religious formation of the ordinance seems to have been at least viewed as somewhat uncorrupted, which is very, very, very interesting to me. And I do wonder how much more Saint Potato Head will matter in the long term. Now I'm just imagining that the Saint looks like Mrs. Potato Head from Toy Story with the ordinances or alien kids. That's what I'm saying, dude. Yeah. So that was, I think, the most notable lore bit. I don't think anything that we learned from the backstories was ultimately all that notable. Seems like there's an evil priest in Volcaru. Doesn't seem to be relevant, at least in the moment. And a corrupt religious figure. So notable. I'm not sure why, but while I'm deeply invested in Exandria lore, I have zero interest for AOU lore. Really sounds like something I would like. It just doesn't do it for me. It's interesting. I'm pretty interested in it. But I also think broadly, I'm not as interested in, how do I say it? What you might call very grimdark, sort of settings. AOU is really is not that much of my cup of tea. Dark Souls, not that much of my cup of tea. I think the closest I probably get to grimdark is Warhammer. It's Warhammer 40k, which is somewhat grimdark, but I think is not as dark, I might say, or at least it has this sort of sci-fi opera, abstraction of it, compared to something like Dark Souls. I have never played either Dark Souls or Warhammer, and I am substantially more interested in Warhammer lore than I am in Dark Souls lore in any way. Yeah, so I think that is a factor for me, but I guess I'm not convinced it will eventually come up or matter in the game. That is also true, and I will say I am trying to restrict myself to talking about lore that I think might come up. And that is not always entirely clear. And it's why the last 2 episodes, I had very little notable lore bits. And even this one, I only have really 1. Even though if we were in Exandria, or we were in, campaign 1, campaign 2, whatever, what have you, I would probably be writing down in a lot more detail about Volcaru and about its residents, and I would really be paying attention to the names and all that. Yeah, I'm not nearly as detailed about the lore that I'm taking in for this. I'm really only taking in broad session lore that I think has a shot of coming back. So I think that's super fair. It's because AOU is short term while Exandria is longer and always developing. I think that seems to be Chat Noir's general area that they're operating in, and I think that's very fair. And I'm operating in that area to an extent, at the very least. Yeah, as well. Okay, now I wanted to separate these out a little bit, because these aren't necessary. They are things that I did or didn't like. But they are really like system-specific takeaways, like really distinct comparisons between like the fundamental ways that Daggerheart operates compared to D&D. Sort of separate from Age of Umbra, kind of separate from Matt's DMing, or GMing, I should say. And the first one that I have written down, at least, is Theater of the Mind Environment Anchoring. Now, if you're a relatively long-time viewer, you will probably know I don't watch a lot of TTRPG content on YouTube. I don't really engage with that as a consumer, even though I make TTRPG-related content. And so I am not sure if there is an existing term for what I'm about to describe, or if people don't have a term for it, but they are very aware of it. I have no idea. So feel free to tell me if there's already a term for this. But the thing that I call anchoring is something that I learned from Blades in the Dark. And it is this strategy, I would say, that I used in order to orient the players and myself within a theater of the mind environment. And it was really, really sort of standout to me of why anchoring is important when we were in the bridge scene. And so that's also the scene that I'll use to kind of describe what it is. It is essentially the concept of giving the players, how do I say it? A reference point with which you describe other things in relation to. So, during their Rampart exploration, you had Matt mentioning the pyre of Volkaru. And you had it mentioning it as pretty far away, to the point where they had been traveling for a little bit and they couldn't quite tell if it had gotten, smaller or bigger. Right? They knew they were moving towards it, but they couldn't tell how far away it was, right? So it was relatively stable, like far enough away to essentially act as a lighthouse. And a lighthouse is one of the perfect things you can think of when you think of this theater of the mind anchor. It is a thing that you use to orient yourself compared to the rest of the scene. So there's a point in which it's before Matt puts out the map for the bridges. And it's right when they get to the bridge and right when they kind of see that there's a gap and a chasm where Sam asks, what are we trying to do again? We're trying to get across the gap? And that is a question that, to me, is indicative of someone getting lost in the theater of their own mind, of losing track of what's going on. It's something that is a consistent problem with theater of the mind, and it is something that I think you need to have strategies to avoid. And I think that Matt was really, really close in a way that I really empathized with because it's hard. And I think that Matt set up a really good anchor in the Volkaru fire. Like, imagine this. Imagine if Matt had more consistently referred back to the pyre, right? Referred to, the pyre is ahead of you. You can see it twinkling from across the gap where the bridge has collapsed. Okay, immediately we've oriented ourselves. We need to get to Volkaru. We know the pyre's in Volkaru. The pyre is across the bridge. We need to get across the bridge. Now that we have linked the bridge to our overall reference point, to our overall anchor, we can now refer to things in terms of the bridge. But you have to re-anchor things occasionally. So you have to re-describe things in terms of the anchor. And so when they are going up to it, rather than describing a PC in relation to where the Pain Beast is, describing where both of them are in relation to the pyre. Like the pyre is at your back, the pain beast right in front of you, or the pain beast to your left. You are lit from the same side by the faint twinkling of the pyre's light, even making it this far out into the world. It's like the faintest of moonlight. I'm not saying that's how we should have described it, because that might have some lore implications. But you can kind of see what I mean by describing things in terms of the anchoring. Like describing that the same side of your face puts both of you in a certain relationship to the anchor, and then you place them in relation to each other. And with those 3 points of reference, where the PC is, where this third party is, and where the anchor is, it is much, much easier for a player to orient themselves within the space. Running ads, we're going to skip these ads. Like using the clearest landmark in a location to always remind the player where everything is. Exactly. You pick a clear, very distinct landmark. And you don't describe everything in relation to the landmark, but you frequently re-describe things in relation to the landmark. It is like the consistent thing that your descriptions will go back to. Where you describe it once and then maybe you don't do it for a couple of descriptions and then you work it in again. And especially if there's a big movement shift, you work it back in again to kind of give the players context for how that movement shift affected the stage. It's hard. I don't want to, and this is why it's in the takeaway section and not things I didn't like. Because, and let me see even what I wrote down about it. Like a city skyline. City skyline's a perfect example. Yes. Something that either is unmoving itself, and I think this is a somewhat important feature of an anchor. An anchor can be, you can do it to where the anchor is close to the PCs, to the adversaries. So you might think of maybe there's a fountain in a square and you pick the fountain as the anchor. The only problem with that is if things have radial symmetry, then it becomes a little bit ambiguous sometimes, right? If the anchor is to a player's back or is in front of a player, if the arena centers around the anchor, well, the place that in front of them can be a lot of different places. Whereas if it's something like a city skyline, a lighthouse, the pyre, the Volkaru pyre in this case, it is changing its location relative to the players slowly enough that it being to the front of them is going to mean relatively the same thing across the length of the scene. It is a unmoving reference point with which the players can understand the rest of the scene. And the orientations of things. If you can work in multiple anchors, that's great, but that's just a lot to manage. And so something like the fountain may or may not work. So something in London, it's Big Ben or the, something that is very, very visible from a lot of locations. So a city skyline works really well, yeah. Do you think Matt did a good job with that this episode? I think he got so fucking close in a way that I really respect. Because it is something that I know you need to do and that I have experience failing at. And there's gradients of failure and success with it and how confused or not confused people will get. But something that I wrote down, where did I write this down? Because I did describe it my feelings on it in a little bit more detail in the moment. Let's see. A man put them there. There we go. Okay. Yeah, it's a big thing. Okay. I said, yeah, if I were Matt in this sequence, I would relate almost everything back to the Volcari Pyre. But then, after what I've kind of already told you guys, I said, now I really feel for Matt on this. Like, I feel for my man. Because I think that he was actively trying to do that sort of description, but got a bit lost trying to keep track of the escalating situation as well. So keeping track of introducing the new not guest PCs, but the new PCs, keeping track of the escalating foreshadowing of danger with the Pain Beast, which I think he did amazingly well. I think he did a really good job of communicating like a good escalation of that danger, like of that foreshadowing. It wasn't just he foreshadowed the Pain Beast once and then they showed up. He had an escalating level of foreshadowing the closer and closer they got. Super well done. But there's a lot to keep track of in the scene. And I said in something like 5e, which is more structured, this sort of thing happens less often. But this sort of thing happened to me all the time in BitD. Because BitD is a system that actively encourages theater of the mind over any amount of map, whether it's gridded or not. And it is a system that heavily encourages the use of clocks, which are amazing organizational tools. But the more you use them, the more things you're introducing that need organization, that need, you keeping track of them. The system is built around it. It's very good at handling it, but it's still a lot to handle. And I said, this is real. In BitD, sometimes I would put a sticky note on my screen for certain complicated scenes to remind myself to mention the anchor point of the theater of the mind as often as I could justify it. So I would have, for a complicated scene in a score, I would have, even in, say, a warehouse, even an indoor environment, I would have one of the windows be lit by a very bright light from some sort of, Arcana Tech festival or parade, or from an especially bright moon, and I would have that set of windows be the bright windows, and all the other windows would be darker or dark. And not only did that mean that I could give, if things showed up in the windows, I could give varying descriptions and more flavorful descriptions, but those windows could serve as my anchor point. They were things that could be seen from the entire sort of area of the scene, and relative to the players, they rarely moved. They would kind of move, in terms of your orientation, but not that much. And so for that sort of scene, I would put on my monitor a little sticky note that was remember to describe the lit up windows, or just lit up windows, something like that. So it's hard. So I put it here, I guess it's sort of a critique, but it's more of an identification of one of the challenges of running that sort of scene. And a challenge that I think Matt got really fucking close to nailing. It's the sort of thing that and it's also the sort of thing that is more necessary and gets harder the more interesting you make this sort of scene. I don't know exactly where I said it, or if I did, but that sort of scene is only difficult to manage and needs that level of anchoring because there's a lot of things going on. And if there's a lot of things going on, it's because you're trying shit. And I'm always a fan of that. I'm always a fan of GMs designing scenarios that have a lot of moving parts, that are all kind of interacting in these interesting ways, taking those sorts of swings. And if you're gonna take those sorts of swings, you'll inevitably run into, okay, well, the reason that people don't do that is because it's harder. And so I am incredibly glad that Matt did it, and I think he handled it really well. Just not maybe knock it out of the park well. I think it's like a triple, maybe not a home run. And I think that he had, and I even think that, like, to some extent, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, I think he thought about it to a degree. Like, describing the pyre in the first place was something that was broadly unnecessary, but really helped orient both me and I think the players in the scene. And I will also bring up, I thought that the exploration sequence through the ramparts, while I wasn't super into the ramparts as an environment, I thought they were kind of boring. I thought that Matt did an amazing job at making me feel a sense of movement. Like, I felt like the ramparts were big and they were traversing large distances. And I think a huge part of that was the wolves tracking them. I think that was a really huge part of it. And like the escalating danger of them getting closer and closer. I think that the large bridge was an aspect of that. And I just think that the really consistent but unique kind of updates that we got to the scene as they got closer and closer to Volkaru, but we're still within this sort of contiguous environment of the ramparts, I think made me feel a real sense of scale for one of the first times. Like, I felt a sense of scale on the ramparts that I have not felt in the catacombs, in the mountain, in the traversal from Desperlock to the ramparts. I felt it. I felt it a lot. So I wanted to bring that up because that's a critique I've leveled so far, and I really felt it this time in a really positive way. So overall, I think Matt did an amazing job. I think Matt did a really, really great job. Is it, 100%? Maybe not. But it's only not 100% because he tried more than he needed to, which I'm a huge fan of. So I'm not going to, get down on somebody for that. Next, crafting and downtime timing. Now, this is a bit... How do I say it? It's something that I originally wanted to make an entire self-contained video on. And I still might someday, but I wanted to bring it up in terms of this. Them getting a crafting recipe, super cool. The fact that it takes one of your downtime actions to do makes perfect sense. Huge example of why I think limited downtime actions are such a are such a radically good thing. I love downtime actions. And, working that into both short rests and long rests. Huge thumbs up because it gives you options like we saw with the Warlock's Favor that I fucking adored. It gives you options like this where you can offer a crafting recipe that takes up one of your downtime actions. That is you not regaining resources. That is your time to regain resources. You are going to use it instead to craft this other resource, this consumable. And I will also say, I'm about to levy, not a critique necessarily on Daggerheart, but something that I wish Daggerheart had that it doesn't. But I think that Matt subverted the problem that I'm about to describe. So I think that the crafting is implemented super duper well, irregardless of the thing I'm about to say. Downtime timing. When characters can take short rests, long rests, how much they have to do. in between those things. It's a problem in D&D. It is there is long rests are incredibly beneficial. And I think that anyone that plays Baldur's Gate 3 will absolutely start to feel part of the issue with long rests in D&D, in like the 5e rule set, which is that if you take them too much, it makes the game easier than it should be. You are supposed to have a certain amount of challenge between long rests, because I've said it before, I'll say it again. D&D and Daggerheart are both resource management games. The stakes and a lot of the challenge comes from managing resources across the period between long rests, between essentially recharge events that recharge all or most of your resources. And so how much happens between those is important. It is what is going to define the feel of challenge in those games. Like how much you have to stretch and think about your resource expenditure is a very central and core part of what can make these games challenging in the first place. If you can go Nova every single combat, expending all of your resources at the very start with absolutely no worry that you might run into a situation where you need them later before you can long rest, right? If you have a sense that, oh, well, we'll take a long rest before this will be a problem. If that is how every period between your long rests feels, that's a problem. But it's a problem that D&D does not solve. D&D gives recommendations to GMs on how much should happen between long rests, but there's no mechanical enforcement of it. It is on the GM to balance that. And that is one of the main balancing levers of DMing, in D&D 5e, but I would say that it's a flawed one because the challenge is how much happens between long rests. Every long rest is essentially a reset, especially in D&D, less so in Daggerheart, which is good. But especially in D&D, every long rest is just a nearly full reset, especially because there are no lasting wounds or anything like that. So a DM has to balance between every single long rest. It's not like you can take it easy on them one rest period and then go hard on them the next period, right? They can't save up resources. Daggerheart, it is a little bit different in Daggerheart. It's not fully solved, but the fact that you have limited downtime actions does actually, and the fact that GMs retain fear between long rests, that's a thing that they build up, does help contribute to this, to making the amount that GMs have to balance more flexible. You can take it a little bit easier on them between two long rests, and them essentially, you can then essentially allow them, or let me think of how to say this. That essentially allows them. That taking it easy on them essentially allows them to save up more resources for the next period. So that's a really good thing about Daggerheart. That is a way that Daggerheart has gone at addressing this in a way that D&D did not. And I'm seriously considering using the optional long rest variant in my homebrew game, the one where a night is a short rest. I think that is understandable. I think, unfortunately, it still doesn't solve the core problem. No matter how much in-fiction time actually passes during a long rest, during a short rest, between the two, there is still this underlying issue where there is not a required amount of stuff that happens between long rest periods. That is purely up to the GM to do. And that is still the case in Daggerheart. Don't get me wrong. Daggerheart is not fully out of the woods on this. But that is kind of the core issue here. The GM, no matter how much in-fiction time passes, and to your point and to why this might, what you're talking about might be attractive, is that I do think it's easier using the gritty resting variant, where the rests take longer. I do think it is easier as a GM to rationalize how much needs to happen between rests in order to provide a real challenge. I think that is substantially easier to rationalize within the gritty resting rule, but it still requires the GM to do that. So I don't think it fully solves the problem. In the same way that I think Daggerheart's limited downtime actions help, but it's still ultimately something that the GM has to handle. In comparison to Blades in the Dark. Who could have guessed it? Blades in the Dark fully abstracts time, in-fiction time. It tells you to fully ignore the passage of time. As much time can pass as you want at any given point. What it does is that, it's the obligatory bit D mention, but it's really applicable here because bit D does solve this problem. Not only do they abstract time, but they tell you take downtime and scores in a cycle. All right? After you finish a downtime, the equivalent of a long rest, you have to. It is required by the system that you must do a score, which is the big heist, before you can do a downtime again. So there is a forced, required amount of challenge that the system just mandates before the players can rest again. Now, your players can absolutely still target an easy score, right? Your players can absolutely say, damn, we're like really hurting. We should go after an easy score this time instead of a really difficult one. That's awesome. Like, it now takes this thing that is a little bit metagamey and cheesy. And again, I think you'll kind of know what I mean by that cheesy feel if you play Baldur's Gate 3, of like, I have to actively come up with reasons that I'm not long resting. I have to hold myself back from long resting in Baldur's Gate 3 because I want there to be an amount of challenge. And so to look at that and to say, okay, we're going to take that cheesy thing and we are going to turn it into something that actually feels real within the fiction, right? The distinction between going after a hard score or an easy score, right? They say in fiction, we're really beat up guys. Like, we need to just, do something easy to keep the lights on. You know what I'm saying? We got to go after something simple. That, I think, is incredible. It takes this problem and it turns it into in-fiction sort of reality. And it creates totally naturally a really nice fantasy that I have talked about as a GMing tactic in D&D. Blades in the Dark just programmatically generates, just by the nature of how its mechanics interact. I've talked about ant stomps before. I even talked about it. I think it's in the Dragon Week video. I talked about that a little bit with Diana the Rose. We talked about, I think she talked about it in terms of like showing players how far they've come. And I've talked about something similar of, hey, you should throw a really easy challenge at your players sometimes. They should get to experience how much they've grown. The alternative cycling downtime system makes sure that that exact sort of thing happens. And it not only happens, but it happens in a way to where the players not only get to see how far they've come, but they now get to see, oh my God, this thing that used to be challenging for us is now a way in which we are resting, right? It is, I think it is really like intensely evocative of that fantasy that is something really desirable. So I'm super, that is a way that, Blades in the Dark has, I think, solved this problem in a way that Daggerheart is close to. Like, I think Daggerheart is kind of sniffing at it, and D&D is very far away from. That's like D&D saying you absolutely must kill the dungeon boss to go to bed. It's almost. It's close. You don't have to succeed at the score. To be clear, you can utterly fail. And it also doesn't mandate, what dungeon means. Now, scores have essentially a minimum level of difficulty. Because there is like basically a minimum amount of reward that a score can pay out. Kind of. I'm not going to get too into the weeds, but there's a soft minimum for how tough a score can be, which is relatively easy, but is still not nothing. But it is that mandated baseline of challenge between rests. That I think really, really goes to be good. And the fact that your reward, like the amount that you progress as a faction, like your crew, the amount of loot that you get, and loot is important, like money is important, that is also based on the difficulty of score that you're doing. And how difficult the score was for your group. That directly determines the reward. So by doing a lower tier, essentially, score, or, job, you might think about it as, you are taking less reward for your time. You're probably ticking a bunch of clocks, because also keep in mind, there are things that happen on, like, downtime cycles. So especially like other factions putting plans into motion, often those sorts of plans will tick once per downtime. So by doing a really easy score in order to let yourselves recuperate, you are essentially allowing them to still progress, allowing the other factions to progress at their standard rate, while you and your faction are progressing at a slower rate, right? You're regaining your resources in return for less progress. So, dungeon boss, it is requiring that you essentially enter the dungeon, but you don't have to kill the boss necessarily. And it doesn't mandate what level of dungeon you enter. Seems like it solves it, but also constrains what the game can be about. BitD then has to be about doing heists, which, yeah. To be... how do I say it? Blades in the Dark is about heists. To be very... Yes. Absolutely agreed. Blades in the Dark... Well, and I guess, actually, I'll slightly caveat. Blades in the Dark is about criminals. Not necessarily thieves. There are lots of different types of criminals. I don't remember what they call it in the Blades in the Dark handbook. It's something to the effect of like rapscallions or something kind of fun and vague like that. Let me see. It'll be really, I'll look for it later. But it's something like that. It's like a, oh, you devil, So they are not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be about heists, but it does have to be about criminal activity. However, there are many, many Forged in the Dark products that have taken the core Blades mechanics and have essentially reskinned them. Have made them into, like, there is a, like, high fantasy version of Blades in the Dark that is like a Forged in the Dark product. So while Blades in the Dark, yes, is about doing criminal stuff, you can abstract the thought process of a score into really anything. It can be abstracted into a job, just in general. You have to be a professional group of some kind. I will wholeheartedly say that. The Blades in the Dark mechanics are, at their baseline, about factions interacting with each other. That is like the super duper baseline level of it. Blades skins that as criminal factions and you know, law-abiding factions and that sort of thing. And that's how they kind of draw out what you will be doing. It is criminal stuff. But the underlying mechanics are all just about factions. So your crew could just as easily be an adventuring party. But an adventuring party that, like, needs to somewhat, like, care about their prestige. Like, their level of fame needs to, like, kind of matter within the setting because that's, like, a direct mechanic, right? And there need to be other factions hanging around, other adventuring parties, other guilds and adventurers parties. There need to be those things hanging around in order for the kind of system to work correctly. So I would say that is what BitD definitely has to be about. Heist specifically, a little bit less so. But Blades in the Dark does have to be about heists, but you can reskin it and it would then be Forged in the Dark. Oh, okay. The actually resting is in some way kind of using a resource, time. Yes. And that is why this point is called crafting and downtime timing. That makes sense? Hell yeah. I love talking about Blades. And this is a really interesting thing where all three of these systems handle this in very different ways. And I think it results in a very different experience. And the time is truly the kind of critical factor. We know you love talking about BitD. Time is the critical factor. Blades in the Dark tells you, do not worry about literal passage of time. We abstract that into the downtime score cycle. That is what measures the progress of things over time. And I think that the real problem with Daggerheart and with D&D, like, if I had to, like, really succinctly identify the problem that Blades in the Dark solves, is that Blades in the Dark pegs progress to time really explicitly, and it pegs resting to progress. Like, it pegs those things to each other in a way that is inescapable. Resting requires progress. Progress requires time. And time is abstracted into this required cycle. Now, and I think that core baseline ethos, I'm not exactly sure how you would implement it into Daggerheart. They're really close. There would basically need to be some minimum level of thing that they need to do before they can rest again, which is weird. And like it would require, I think, a lot more of a, not necessarily an overhaul, but it would require the introduction of concepts that would really fundamentally change the feel of Daggerheart. And so I understand why they didn't go in that direction. I think without going in that direction, they made a ton of improvements. I like downtime in Daggerheart so much more than in D&D. Like, and they have the benefit of seeing D&D 5e, seeing what worked, seeing what didn't, and being able to iterate on it. So it's not necessarily D&D's fault that it didn't have this, but it is to Daggerheart's credit that it does. So yeah. My favorite description of a mercenary is killing people for a living. So a party that is kind of a criminal crew, if you abstract enough. Absolutely. And I mean, to be even more explicit about it, Confused Strawberry, I will pull it up. Fine, you got me. I'll pull it up. I'll pull up the handbook. Give me one moment. Hold your frickin' horses, okay? No, that's BRP. There's Blades in the Dark. There we go. To show you, there's PC Advancement. The crew. So by default, at least within Blades in the Dark, there are 6 types of crews. There are the assassins. There are the bravos, which the bravos are more of like a mafia sort of feel. They're thugs, they're enforcers, they're fixing poker games, They've got, everyone in their pocket. They're much more of like a mob sort of vibe. They're smashing up stores that won't accept their protection. That sort of feel. Occult, pretty clear what they are. Hawkers are fences. So these are people that deal in illegal goods, but don't necessarily deal with like transporting goods. They know people who know people. They can make connections. They can facilitate deals. They can provide safe houses or safe refuge locations, that sort of thing. The shadows. The shadows are more of your classic heist thieves. They are actually breaking and entering and stealing some shit. And then the smugglers are smugglers. So when I say that BitD is about criminals and not necessarily heists and thieves, this is what I mean. Shadows are about heists, mostly. You can do any sort of job, but each crew type is better or worse at some kinds of jobs. And shadows are really good at heists. And so, but what type of crew you are will really depend on the type of criminal activity you get up to. So that is in terms of like, a D&D party is kind of a group of criminals. A little bit, yeah. They're not too far off from bravos in that way. Yeah. For a setting like AOU, I feel like you need 1 less short rest and 1 downtime action on short rest, not 2. I think that could be an interesting way to implement Lurking Darkness. I think that's possibly an interpretation of like a change that could be made to like what Lurking Darkness is that I think I would like more. Like I'd have to think through it a little bit more, Zephod, but I don't hate where your head's at. I don't hate it. That could be interesting. Yeah. So as a fix for D&D, I would suggest doing what BitD does. Just give adventures that must be dealt with within a long rest. Samego was right all along. We need time pressure. You have indeed hit on why I am so obsessed with giving PCs like clocks and pressures and all of this. Yes. The system will not mechanically enforce it, but I do think it's incredibly important to have adversaries making consistent progress pegged to how many long rests are being taken. So that if players fuck off and do absolutely nothing between long rests because they want to play it safe, the adversaries are progressing during that time. I think that is the most baseline level fix, but it's hard to manage in D&D. It's much, much harder to manage in D&D than in something like BitD, that sort of mandates it and balances it for you. And maybe using short-term clocks to spur the party on. You can advance long-term clocks on a rest and maybe the same on a short rest. I think you guys are completely correct in terms of a good GMing tactic to solve this. I think those are great GMing tactics. Yeah. Like, I think you guys are very correctly understanding what I'm identifying as, like, what is the core problem with these potential systems, and what do we need to do as GMs to, like, manage it. I think you're pretty dead on. And Daggerheart is so radically close to it. And the only thing that I think the GMing tactic or this description of that tactic doesn't fully solve is that communication to the players. One of the good things about Blades in the Dark's setup is that because a score is mandated, the players feel that they are making some amount of progress, or that they at least could have. So it feels very natural that other factions could make the same amount of progress, or more, or less. There's this very natural feel to, like, oh yeah, it makes perfect sense that our enemy faction was advancing their plans while we were doing our thing, like while we were doing our scores. And that is still sort of left to the GM to sort of resolve in D&D. It is pretty up to the DM to present the players with encounters, like you kind of mentioned, like really short-term clocks, things to make sure that they are doing stuff that makes progress, or that at least feels like it could have. That is still very on the DM. But I think Daggerheart, having clocks, having limited downtime actions, those two things by themselves are putting Daggerheart light years closer to solving this, to system, to solving this problem within the system compared to D&D. D&D, it's all on the DM to solve. Daggerheart, the system takes care of way more of it, yeah. Bravos is an old-timey Italian word for thugs or brigands. There you go. That word gave me a flashback for second-year Italian literature. Bravi in Italian, but I think the original is Spanish from the time Spain controlled a huge chunk of modern Italy. There you go. Yeah. I think it's a great word. I like that they're bravos instead of thugs. It feels very it feels more mafia to me, which is probably at least partially because I'm American, and mafia and Italians are somewhat historically linked in the public consciousness in America. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that's probably why it evokes that to me. Dagger gives the PCs a lot at low level. Grimdark setting will probably require GMs to skim the benefits down. I can see that. I think that is, and that is one of the reasons that I really like the precedent of frames having these frame-specific, essentially setting-specific mechanics. While I don't love the specific implementation of Lurking Darkness, I like that it exists. I like that they're doing something akin to Lurking Darkness, even if I don't like, the fact that they used a random roll table and the way that it interacts with taking watch. Like, I don't love the implementation, but I really love that lurking darkness is a mechanic that they thought about and that they felt needed to exist to accomplish the goal that they wanted to accomplish. You know what I'm saying? So I fully agree with you, Zaphod, is like Age of Umbra needed lurking darkness. It needed, I don't remember what it's called, it's like Blight of the Soul or something. Like, I'm really glad that it has those setting mechanics and that they're introducing those as like, oh yeah, Daggerheart has these baseline mechanics, but your setting should have its own mechanics that make your setting feel like your setting. You know what I'm saying? I think that is incredibly pertinent and poignant. Are those things both applicable here? Maybe they are. I don't know. Bravos is classier. Bravos is classier. That's true. Okay. Next thing that was like a Daggerheart specific takeaway: wasting fear. This is something that I found to be interesting when I saw Matt do it, in my opinion. So there was a comment that he made during the bridge fight. Essentially, when he took away the spotlight, like when he stole the spotlight using a fear, they were all like, you know, they had the moment of, you can do what? But he, I don't want to say defended necessarily, but like he was sort of like, oh yeah, but it's more expensive this way. Like, I have to spend a fear to do it rather than just getting it from the result of a roll. And that kind of light bulb moment for me. I was like, oh, that is true. That's very true. Like, if a GM feels that things are going pretty rough for the players and they want to waste some fear, which, I mean, fear is where the DM or the GM derives their power. So, like, what fuels a lot of their stuff in Daggerheart, in the same way that hope fuels a lot of things for the PCs. A good way to just throw some of it away is to steal the spotlight more often. Now, it's something you have to be careful with. You can't be stealing the spotlight all the time, or else your players are gonna, they're gonna pick up on that. But it is something that a GM could tactically implement in order to essentially reduce their fear gain. Is like consistently sort of skimming off the level of fear that they're getting by consistently stealing the spotlight. And it also came to me in terms of there was another time in which Matt sort of wasted fear. Oh, the hive collectors running away. Like, debatably, I don't think there was anything mechanically that said the hive keepers need to get away in order for the danger to escalate. Maybe there was. I don't want to say that there wasn't. But certainly, both of them didn't need to. Once one was away, one could have stayed. But Matt chose to spend 2 fear to move, I think 2 fear. Or maybe 1 fear. Like one got moved with a free move, and then one got moved with fear. I don't quite remember. But regardless, he spent more fear than he probably technically needed to in order to accomplish the overall consequence and effect. And it rang to me as a very clever and like under the radar way to waste fear, right? And I put waste fear in air quotes because I think waste has a negative connotation to it. I just view this as like a balancing lever that the GM can partake in. If they feel as though the situation that the PCs are currently in is more dangerous than it should have been, these are tactics that are at their disposal to limit the amount of fear that they have, to make sure they're not hitting their cap and not spending it. These are things that are less consequential than alternative things they could do. And looking at it in that way of, okay, as a GM, what are the things that I can do with my individual fear unit that is more consequential or less consequential to the PCs? And I think that will be like a sort of tactical feel to GMing that will really give a lot of power to the GM to make sure that the challenge is being implemented in a way that makes sense, right? To make sure that the PCs are getting consistently and appropriately challenged. So I liked it. I liked it a lot. I mean, it's one more layer of all the things I love about fear. Like, the more I see fear used, the more I love and adore it as a mechanic. So it's just one more layer to why I like it. Yeah. Getting in the habit of using fear for environment and counter abilities as a GM moves during combat, not just attacking. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that was a specific takeaway that I did love, but it's also something that is like, it's not specifically a good or a bad thing. It's a tactical tool. It's a lever you can pull as a GM. And then, okay, we have my final point. And for this, I had to make a whole separate slide just to represent this one point. GM turns and when they happen. Okay. So, I didn't fully comprehend exactly how GM turns worked until this session. It came into much clearer focus for me. And that's partially because of the, I would say, somewhat confusing nature of watching a Daggerheart combat. So maybe I'm just getting more used to watching it. But the way that it works, and I'll go through kind of all this step by step, because it took me a while to even like think out. But GMs gain one move. And there is this distinction that was not overly clear in my head between a move, a turn, and fear and hope. These are all separate concepts. So moves are essentially things that the DM, or I should say the GM or the PC, gains for free. But they can then, especially the GM, can use fear, I should say, to generate more moves. They can convert fear into moves. And this is somewhat of the remnant of the old action counter sort of system. And because you can convert one fear into one move, 1-to-1, they're essentially equivalent, or they at least have an equivalent exchange, very similar to how hope and fear have an equivalency. Like, the PCs are gaining a little bit more of it, but hope and fear are almost exactly equivalent 1-to-1 in terms of like the things that they can do and the ways that they are gained. So that means roughly, take all this, it's all rough, it's all with a grain of salt. Hope is roughly equivalent to fear, which is roughly equivalent to a move, PC move or a GM move. So, a GM gains one move on fear and failure and automatically takes the spotlight. Now, on a failure with fear or a success with hope, a success with fear, they gain fear, which can be converted into a move. So if we consider all of the times and all of the ways, essentially, that they gain both move and fear, and then we convert the fear into moves, we can see about how many GM moves the GM is gaining per turn. So, when a PC takes a turn, let's say, they use a move, a PC move, to do an action roll, and that can either generate hope or fear, and it can either succeed or fail. Totally, barring modifications to the roll. So, in that situation, a GM is gaining essentially 2 moves 50% of the time. So when a PC fails with fear, that's a 25%. Failing with fear, they get 2. Wait, where was I going with this? Oh, wait, no. Actually, this is slightly wrong. But oh my gosh, I just realized No. Actually, is this wrong? Yes, this is wrong. The math will work out the same way, though, I think. Oh, no, actually, let me check. Let me make sure. Because I just realized that I did the math wrong. They're gaining 2 fear 25% of the time when you fail with fear. Right? When you fail with fear, they get a move for the failure, and they get the equivalent of a move for the fear. And then when you fail with hope or succeed with fear, they get 1 move from both of those scenarios. So in this case, it'll actually be let me get out of that. So you can see that I was kind of going on a little bit of a thought train. So this is actually 50% of the time, and then there's 0. There's 25% of the time where they gain nothing. That is success with hope. So in this case, it is 25%, or 2 times 0.25 would be, I can do math, just wait for it. That is 0.5. And then 1 times 0.5 is also 0.5. So actually, I was wrong. And this is actually even more interesting. Oh my goodness. This is actually even more asymmetrical than I thought originally when I was doing this kind of thought process originally. So what is actually going on here? 25% of the time they're getting 2 GM moves, 1 from the fear and 1 from the free move that they get from failure. 50% of the time they're gaining 1, and 25% of the time they're gaining 0, which is 1 GM move per PC turn, on average. On average, when a PC does an action roll, they're gaining 1 move. But since hope and fear are roughly equivalent, 1-to-1, a PC is actually gaining roughly 1.5 moves per turn, because they get a free move at the start of their turn, per PC move. They get a free move at the start of their turn, and then half the time they're generating hope, not even considering crits. So essentially, if we equate hope and fear, they're essentially getting half of a move every time. So every time they roll, they are generating half a move more than the GM before even taking critting into account. And no hope or fear can be generated during a GM turn. When a GM takes the spotlight, when it goes to them from failure or when they spend a fear to take it, they are not able to generate hope or fear. Unless there's a specific mechanic that says otherwise, because reaction rolls can't do it. At least, as of now. So that means that during PC turns, which are the only turns where you're capable of generating hope and fear, the PCs are going way up on the GM in terms of just passive resource gain in general. They are just getting ahead every single move. Now, the trade-off. Because I have gotten into some asymmetries within the GM and player experience that kind of made me kind of scratch my head a little bit. And I think that this asymmetry that I finally kind of honed in on kind of explains those others. Because I have said before during these past streams, it's weird to me, and I don't know if I like that this, doesn't exist. It's weird to me that there's no way for a PC to steal the spotlight back from the GM. We're going to skip ads. It's weird to me that there's no way to steal the spotlight back as a player. But now, I kind of get it. Because every time something happens, the players are getting more out of that. They're getting ahead. If we think about this in terms of the action economy, the longer a fight goes on, the more ahead the players are getting in terms of the action economy. There is essentially an escalating benefit. Because the PCs are getting the equivalent of moves more, they are then able to move more. And the reason that I feel really comfortable equating hope to moves is because hope is one of the primary ways that players can modify rolls, making it more likely for them to succeed, gain more hope, restrict the GM from getting fear and from getting moves in general. So I feel really comfortable equating hope to moves because while it cannot be directly utilized as a move, it can be utilized to restrict moves from the GM. But the trade-off for that is that the GM can interrupt them. The GM can interrupt them. The GM cannot be interrupted in general. So when a GM turn starts, either off of failure or by starting with fear, or by rolling with fear, that's the other thing. Oh! That's why. That's why I had this was different. Okay, actually, wait. This makes more sense. The calculation is different. They're actually gaining one move 75% of the time. Because the GM gains fear, right? So they're gaining 2 on a failure with fear. Oh, no. Actually, no, this is still right. You're gaining 2 on a failure with fear. They're gaining 1. Yeah. Never mind. I'll go back to it. Anyways. I'm going crazy here. But the GM, once a GM turn starts, right? Once they start it either from roll with fear or roll with failure, oh, wait, no. Wait, this is actually, no. I am right. On a success with fear, the GM still gains 2 turns. Oh my gosh. It's a little confusing, which is one of the reasons I had to start thinking about it in such depth. So actually, that's okay. On failure with fear and success with fear, the GM gains 2 turns because the spotlight passes to them on a roll with fear and they gain the fear itself. However, my original calculation was correct. And then there is one case, failure with, there's actually 75% of the chance. Because okay. Wait, I've got to think through this. Okay. Let me just think about, I'm going to make these 0 because it's a weird calculation. I'm going to make these 0. So there's a 50% chance on both of the fear rolls, right? There's a 50% chance on both of the fear rolls there's a 50% chance for them to gain 2 fear, or 2 moves, Jesus. Because they gain the fear and the spotlight passes to them. On a failure with hope, they only gain 1 move. The spotlight passes to them, but they do not gain the fear. Success with hope, there's nothing. So this is actually the correct one. I had it correct originally, and then I wigged myself out about it. So it's actually 1.25 GM moves compared to the roughly 1.5 PC moves. So it's a little bit less. It's not that much less, but it is less. God, I got myself all mixed up. Sorry about that. But the advantage comes from once a GM starts their move, they cannot be interrupted. They know the exact state of the battle, right? The battle cannot change until they allow it to change, right? So once a GM turn starts, the only restriction is the amount of fear that the GM has. That's the only restriction. Beyond that, they can take as many moves as they want all at once. The PCs do not have that luxury. They can get accidentally interrupted. Like, because think about that. If a GM has a monster attack a PC and it fails, that does not pass the turn back to the PCs. It stays firmly with the GM. So the only way for a GM to lose control, essentially, is to pass it back. But the trade-off for that control is that they are going to be naturally less powerful as the combat goes on, especially. And again, this isn't even taking into, these statistics are actually slightly worse for the GM given crit values and given crit chance, which we've seen plenty throughout Age of Umbra. So that skews this even a little bit more in the PC's favor. So there is a asymmetry here of the GM has much more control, but the PCs have more raw power. And I won't say I'm fully locked in on whether or not I like it, but I do think I like it. not to bury the lead for too long. I think the idea of the GM having a greater degree of control over the situation is exactly what they should have. I think it plays to what the job of the GM is, right? The job of the GM is to control the narrative and make sure that there's a good challenge, and to make sure that there's a good story overall. So if there is going to be this asymmetry, I definitely think the GM should be on the control side of it, and the player should be on the power side, because what is their goal? It is to create a satisfying story, largely, and a fantasy, heroic adventure. It's to overcome things. So giving them, escalating power throughout the course of a combat, I think plays into that heroic fantasy really well, because it will result in this very natural storytelling. Like there's a phrase in D&D of like the dice tell the story, but not always a heroic one. And I've said before that I think on net, D&D 5e is heroic. It's a heroic system that tells heroic fantasy stories. The way that combat works doesn't. And the comparison that I'll make is right here of in D&D, your power slowly wanes over the course of combat. Now, at a baseline level, that is just because, you are spending out your resources. You do something similar in Daggerheart, but because hope regenerates constantly, there's not as many resources that you're spending down throughout the course of a combat in a Daggerheart. So that lowering of your power is less pronounced in Daggerheart already. But beyond that, the way that death works at like a baseline level, the way that going down works, Daggerheart allows you to freely stabilize. So there is no required action on the part of your party if you want a risk-free surviving the encounter, right? They don't need to take turns away from doing the encounter to ensure that you survive. Because in D&D, if it's a really close combat, you're going to have people start to go down, and you're going to need to stabilize them, or you're going to need to get them up. Now, you can let that be up to chance, according to the death rolls, or you have to take your turns to go over and ensure that they either get stabilized or get popped back up. We talked about that in the Raishan encounter in Vox Machina, where someone very rightly pointed out that at a certain point in the combat, Scanlan really didn't have the opportunity to use his higher level spells, his 8th level spell slot, because they'd reached a point in the combat where they were in desperation mode. They were trying to desperately get people back up and stop them from dying. Even more than that. Dagger also has the aspect of gambling where you can just come back totally action-free. That is certainly an aspect, but I don't think it's the most important one. Daggerheart also has this escalating power of you are gaining more moves every move than the GM is. As opposed to D&D, which is based on the action economy, which is based on how many people you have up, right? Daggerheart's action economy, well, it's kind of non-existent. But your overall power as a side does not get reduced when someone goes down. If someone chooses to stabilize, if they risk it and die, your power as a side in the combat is not reduced. Maybe it's reduced in a kind of theoretical way where the amount of options and variable tools that you have at your disposal, the amount of options you have goes down. And so that does in some ways limit your power, but not nearly as much as a missing body in D&D, where it directly affects the action economy. It affects how many turns you get in relation to the adversaries. Now there is a vice versa here with the adversaries as well. The adversaries also get hit by the action economy, and that's why the kind of overwhelming strategic theory a lot of times in D&D is to go after the smaller guys first, the guys with less health, because you're reducing, or you're pulling the action economy over to your side. Daggerheart doesn't have that. So I would say in D&D, over the course of a combat, it stays relatively kind of even. A lot of the things are dual-sided, but broadly, a D&D party almost always gets less powerful across the course of a combat. They are capable of less. A Daggerheart party can be capable of less if they do basically nothing and a lot of them die instantly, and so you're reducing that, you're reducing those options. But broadly, because of this, and because this math, this 1.25 to 1.5, is even more swayed by crits, everything about doing stuff in Daggerheart is leaning it towards the party. The party is actually broadly getting capable of doing more on average every time they do something. Now they might have to, spend some of that capability, and there's no guarantee that they will actually come out the other side stronger. But broadly, they're coming out more up than the GM is. And I think that's an incredibly good way to evoke the heroic fantasy, right? As you are running out of your defenses, as your armor slots are getting low, your HP is getting low, you should have more hope than you started with. You know what I'm saying? You are getting to a point where your variability, the amount of options that you have is going down, the amount of options the enemies have is going down, you're losing your defensive resources, but you've actually possibly gained or gone even on offensive resources, and some, hope can be used defensively sometimes. But you're going up on that, whereas the GM is kind of only sinking lower and lower because they're gaining less fear, less turns than you are. So you're just slowly getting an edge over the enemy side. So the longer it goes on, the lower your health will be, the lower your AC or your armor slots will be, and the more power you'll have. So I think it will lead to a lot more really natural close calls, which I think is very evocative of that heroic fantasy. Getting those close call moments where it's like, oh, we just barely survived. The fundamental math of Daggerheart facilitates that happening so much more than D&D does. D&D math does not facilitate. I don't think it, precludes it by any means, but it does not naturally kind of sway the odds in the more heroic direction compared to Daggerheart. Daggerheart really naturally sways it in that direction, where the longer a fight is, the tougher time the PCs are probably going to be having in terms of health, but also the more hope they will have generated. Compared to, and they will have generated more hope than the DM has generated consummate fear. So it's just fucking cool, man. It's really cool to see. And I've certainly had my critiques of Daggerheart. Like, don't let it be said that I have only glazed it. But it is so cool to dig down into the fundamental math and the fundamental mechanics and find things that I fucking like. Like, when I dig down into the fundamental mechanics of D&D and the fundamental math of D&D, what I find is that, oh yeah, every 4th level, every time you can get an ASI, you need to make sure that your primary stat is going up 1 modifier increment. You need to make sure of that. If you're a barbarian, your strength needs to be going from a +3 to a +4 to a +5. Every 4 levels. Level 4, level 8, level 12. And I know that I'm right about that because they made all feats half feats. They acknowledge that that is a bit of an implicit requirement inside of D&D. That if you do not move up your modifier increment, you will be falling behind and you will be having a broadly worse time. Now, does that mean that you have to do that to have a good time? Absolutely not. I have many times strayed away from the fundamental math, and lots of power builds will also stray away from the fundamental math, but they need to establish that the way that they are straying is more powerful, or, maybe just more fun, than the natural power that is expected from D&D's progression. Right? That is not interesting to me. That is restrictive. In a similar way that I thought ASIs from races were very restrictive. In a way that was not interesting to me. Whereas I look at Daggerheart, and I've been looking at the math off and on every week, and I just keep finding shit I like. And so it's it's good signs, man. The more I watch it, the more I dig into it, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, damn, this system is doing what it wants to be doing, It's like this fundamental math is not good if you don't want a heroic adventure. If the system is not meant to evoke that heroicism, like this system, I wouldn't like it in Blades in the Dark. That's not what Blades in the Dark is about. And so this existing in Daggerheart is also complementary to them having a vision, and I think just building fundamental systems that accomplish that vision. They're not trying to accomplish the vision through sort of layered on top mechanics. They're not trying to accomplish it through the mechanics that, or the kind of window dressing, you might say, which is, I think, a lot of D&D with like exploration. It reminds me a lot of what the developer of BRP, Jason Durall, said during our Dragon Week interview, where he talked about BRP's basic role playings. Just fundamental choice that they wanted to make a system where the math of the system was instantly intuitive. They wanted every dice roll, every challenge, every DC to be immediately and instantly intuitive as to how likely it was to happen. And you can see that in the system. Like the fact that they use the percentile, it's always a chance out of 100. That is a fundamental mechanic of the system that is going towards accomplishing that intuitiveness goal. And I think is incredibly good at doing so. And I think something very similar with Daggerheart. So I know that I've just been talking good shit nonstop for probably like 30 minutes, but I'm not going to hold back my opinions. You guys know I will talk about things that I think Matt is doing wrong, that I think I don't like about Daggerheart. I do not like his implementation of Lurking Darkness. I think it's a little silly and unnecessary. I have been very kind of off and on critical of his description of environments and the relative lack of depth that I find within them. But this shit is I can't help but love. So, it's amazing auto balancing. I feel like GMs can get far more done with their turns. There's an advantage to going second. GMs have the advantage of usually being the one reacting to what has happened. That can be very useful. They have less guesswork. 100%. Could not agree more. They have so much less guesswork that they need to utilize or they need to rely on in order to execute on their plans. But they have less power with which to execute their plans. And I think that asymmetry is a fundamentally good one for a heroic kind of leaning TTRPG. Yeah. And then the last thing, theories. I don't have a lot to say about this. And I also think, we were talking about the lore earlier and how I'm, more or less interested in it. I do think my brain has definitely been theorizing less than it was at the start, just naturally. And I think that it is related to what Chat Noir said earlier. I'm just not sure if it's going to be used. One of the things with my theorizing in Critical Eyes about Exandria and about Vox Machina and, this entire campaign in this world is that any time I theorize about something, it is almost always me theorizing about something that I know is going to happen to some extent. I just don't know exactly what will happen. So, for example, a very classic theory that I won't go too much into, but one of my favorites, the moon tree, right? I knew there was a cancerous tree. I knew relatively without a shadow of a doubt that they were going to go and interact with the cancerous tree. And that provoked theorizing about what that encounter would look like. Vampire sex orgy. I knew that there was a really good shot of them going and interacting with Iman. Or sorry, not Iman, with Jaman, Saord. And so even though vampire sex orgy was a little bit ridiculous, it was based on this kernel of something I was pretty confident would happen. So I knew that all the time I was spending theorizing was going to get paid off in one way or the other. I was theorizing about something that I would either be wrong or right about. And it was unlikely to be something that just didn't get addressed, right? And that's how I felt at the beginning of this series. But I am slowly feeling less and less about it. So even this, I'm not entirely certain that the gods were indeed gods in the way that we typically think about that sort of thing. I've theorized that like the clank vessels, that the clank like souls are just the veiled gods, and I still think that's feasible. And that there's not this necessarily like divine pantheon, so much as there were like elevated kind of superhuman or supernatural beings. Maybe not fully Wizard of Oz. Well, I guess sort of Wizard of Oz style, because in Wizard of Oz, there are magic users. Like, magic is real. But the vast majority of people are not magicians. So yeah, kind of Wizard of Oz style, where they kind of elevate magic users more than maybe they should, especially in the post-Wicked era. And the Wizard of Oz himself has been like elevated to this deific standpoint, even though he himself is not even a magician, right? I think what I am interpreting as a possibility for the veiled gods is that it was more, or is that they are more akin to if the wizard was elevating himself to this deific status, but was just a magician, in the same way that Elphaba or Madam, whatever her teacher is, Marable? I don't know. In the same way as those people are magicians. And so I think that is something that is possible. But I do also kind of find myself not wanting to theorize and not wanting to engage with that as much. Because I am kind of like, I don't know. I don't really know where the story's going. Like, even right now in Campaign 1 in Critical Eyes, I'm theorizing about... You'll definitely notice that I am theorizing much more about Vecna than I am about like a demonic or a devil-based incursion. Even though, in terms of like likelihood, I think they're roughly equivalent in terms of like what will be the big bad at the end of the campaign. And by the way, no spoilers. I'm on episode 86, so no spoilers past 86 for Campaign 1. Thank you. But I view those as like roughly likely in my head, but I theorize more about Vecna because there is just more of a guarantee to me that they will need to deal with something related to Vecna before the end of the campaign. Like, I could see them just being like, meh, we don't really care about Hodis. Like, he's just not that big a deal. We'll just kind of watch out for him. Or even I could see it getting taken care of off screen. I think that'd be a little weird, but I could see it happening in a way that I could not see that happening for the black hole underneath Whitestone. For the sucky siphon underneath Whitestone, like, that is a hanging Chekhov's orb, right? In a way that Hodis just kinda... I mean... he is in theory, which is why I'm even considering demonic incursion as one of like the BBG forces in Campaign 1, is because there is still Chekhov's Hodis, Chekhov's Rakshasa, lurking out there. But he's kind of a punk, man. I'm just not that afraid of him in the way that I am about the stable black hole in the basement. I'm a little more afraid of that. A little bit more afraid of when that gets shot in Act 2. So, that is why that orb being there is why I theorize about Vecna more. But when we have basically nothing that I can really identify as a Chekhov's gun in Age of Umbra, it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder. And, you know, I don't blame Matt for it, to be clear, because this miniseries is not just to tell an interesting story, right? This is not going to be the legend of Idol and Misty in the same way that it was the legend of Vox Machina, right? This Age of Umbra series is much more of a tour, right? It's much more of a tour of the Age of Umbra frame, of Daggerheart as a system. And I think you'll notice that I spend a lot of time talking about Daggerheart, and I'm spending progressively less and less time talking about the story. And I don't blame them for that. You know, I don't think that is like a wrong thing for them to do. But it does make theorizing, which is something that I very much enjoy doing, it makes it a lot more difficult. So, you know, I have this theory, but I'm not even really like, I don't want to say I'm not excited to talk about it. If chat has some, you know, additions, I would love to go through them. But I find it hard to like kindle that passion that you can see when I theorize in Critical Eyes, you know? I love theorizing. I love trying to guess who the gun is gonna shoot. You know, that's one of my favorite pastimes. Not necessarily to be right, but just to think of the most interesting way for it to be shot. You know what I'm saying? I find that an incredibly fun and enjoyable sort of mental exercise. But if something that I identify as a gun is just not, it becomes like the monastery. Like, I think the monastery is what really turned me off of kind of theorizing, is because I spent a long time theorizing about the potential plot and the potential significance of Luzal, only for it to not only get kind of pushed to the background, but for it to be like unacknowledged in a way that took me out of the fiction, that like de-invested me. How much it was just left in the dust. And it's like, to me, the you know, at the beginning, the Luzal Monastery was like that was the mantelpiece, you know? And so it somewhat feels like if they can just, you know, if they're going to toss that aside, which, again, I don't necessarily blame them for doing, especially given that Liam and Laura are waiting in cages on the way to Volcar or whatever. You know, I don't blame them for throwing away Luzal, but it makes it hard to get up that passion, you know? It is sort of a test drive demo for the DH system. Yeah. It's a test drive, and I don't blame them for that. I have previously argued that they should have modified the editing in a way that would serve that exact purpose even more. So I don't blame them for doing that, and it is making me. I will tell you, it's working. I want to play Daggerheart so much more than I did before Age of Umbra. I have gotten so much more interested in Daggerheart watching Age of Umbra, even though I don't really like the setting that much. Like, it's fine. I find it somewhat interesting, but it's not the thing that's hooking me. I'm just, like, really loving watching Daggerheart. So it's a good goal. It's a goal that I'm personally appreciating. It's just not necessarily mutually exclusive, but it's tough with theorizing and lore and all that. So that's that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. Yeah. Let me see. It kind of sucks when someone tells you there is something buried under X and you dig and find nothing. Well, it's to me, I think the wild thing still, I will be I still somewhat hope that there's some acknowledgement of Lose All and like what is fucking going on with it. Because to expand this analogy, the way that both Matt and the cast have interacted with Lose All Monastery kind of feels like if someone told me that there was something buried under the X, and then I watched some people dig for a little bit, and then there's a hermit crab under the X that pokes all of their eyes out. And then they go, and then like goes and like shreds up their tents and their hammocks and whatever on the beach. And then they go, oh man, we need to get replacement hammocks. And you know, oh, we can't leave here without nothing. You know, we need like treasure. We need replacement hammocks or whatever. And then they go to Home Depot and they don't even acknowledge that they didn't find the treasure underneath the X. You know what I'm saying? Actually, to reformat the metaphor slightly, it's like someone told you, yeah, there's like a hammock buried under X. You look for it. Hermit crab goes, slices up your existing hammock, and then you go to Home Depot instead of continuing to dig at the X. And not only does the person that originally told you about the X say you should go to Home Depot, I don't know why Home Depot in this case for a hammock, but that's what we're doing. But also everyone that was digging is like, all right, Home Depot it is. And they don't even acknowledge the X, where the hermit crab came from and where you were told that there was stuff. It's just, it's weirdly frustrating. Or it's not weirdly frustrating. It's frustratingly weird that this is what happened. I don't get it. It seems to reject all of my natural storytelling instincts in a way that is very disorienting to me. And in a way that doesn't even bespeak of like bad storytelling to me. It just, and I'm not going to go through this all again because I went on a long scree about it in episode 3. But it makes me feel like I'm missing something. And I'm pretty sure I'm not. So what are you gonna do? That's amazing imagery. Thank you very much. But with that, I love Daggerheart. I think Matt's GMing this session, top notch. Top notch. I really liked the feeling of movement through the ramparts. I liked the Haunted Bay. I didn't mention it. I think that's maybe one of the most unique feeling environments so far. And the same thing with the Screaming Forest. They're kind of considering them as a blob. I think this was the most unique environment to date. I think there's I think it's a little bit of cheating because the ways in which it's unique are not necessarily NPCs, but they are, just non-human adversaries or not even adversaries, entities that make these environments so unique. But I'll give it a pass because they were cool. I liked the way that the Haunted Bay was described. I thought there was a lot of cool imagery with it. I liked the Screaming Forest a lot. So I think I liked his environmental narration a lot. I think that Volkaru was described very distinctly, and I got a very different impression. Not necessarily of the environment. The environment was fine. It's a city in a tower. The city is vertical because the tower is vertical. I mean, fair enough. I can't disagree with that, but not stretching ourselves too much. Although the lighthouse imagery was cool, and with the lighthouse imagery playing into the fact that they're a trade hub, there's something cool there. I won't mind that. and then the actual characters that they interacted with there, I thought were really fun. The encounters were really well run. I think the main thing I didn't like from this session was kind of just the prep of like the Fungrel spot. And what was the other thing I said I didn't like? It's actually hard to remember. Oh, no. What was my other didn't? Oh, 7 players. Well, that was inevitable. So, you know, one of the things I didn't like is something that is relatively out of their control. I mean, I guess they could have decided not to have every player, but I think there's very legitimate marketing and business reasons that they have all of the original cast here. So I don't blame them for that. And then it's like the prep of the Fungrel encounter. I wish it had been, you know, prepped slightly differently, but I thought it was run fantastic. I really liked the pacing of it. I liked the countdown. I liked the, you know, big guy. The little Fungrel were adorable. And I really, really liked their characterization, especially in comparison to Violet and SCREEV. So I think the session as a whole, in terms of GM running, I think this might have been my favorite so far. But it happens to coincide with my waning confidence in theorizing being fun. And a little bit of me getting maybe slightly bored of like the special actions that are being represented within the encounter. So it's my favorite session in terms of running, but in terms of prepping, I'm more mid on it. And I'm hoping that, you know, things coincide. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. We'll just have to see. Call those plot cul-de-sacs. Oh, this seems important. What is it? Don't worry about it. Yeah. Plot cul-de-sac. That could work. But, anywho. I've been watching and thinking and talking about Age of Umbra since, oh my gosh, like 10 or 11 this morning. So, I'm gonna go. I got caught up. Cue SGM to end the stream. What are you talking about? SGM didn't end the Warlock stream. I was sleepy. Dude, we were talking, and he was like, that was the funniest way, because tried to ping me on Discord first, but I was on Do Not Disturb, and so I didn't see it. And so he was like, that was the funniest way that I possibly, or that you possibly could have remembered. And I was like, yeah. Oh, man, it was... I'm trying to think of how much to say. I'm not going to say anything else. I've already said too much. I was sleepy. I was tired. I took a nap, and that's all. But, see you later. Strawberry, Daniel, Chat Noir, everyone else who's here. Thank you very much for joining. I will see you next Wednesday. If you're only interested in Age of Umbra, I get it. I'll see you on Wednesday. And then if you are interested in Critical Eyes as well, I'll see you on Friday. And with that... goodbye.